call this a wedding gift? I'm so sorry, dear. It was all I could give. Oh my, is that all? How cheap. Oh.
Look at this. What is this?
I don't know. What does it say? Who wrote this?
Oh my God, it says get out.
We need to leave, now.
Hawthorne Avenue? I know this handwriting.
What does this mean?
He knew. He always knew.
My daughter-in-law held up the four $50 bills I had given them as a wedding gift and laughed. $200, Madison said loudly enough for half the reception to hear. I think the valet got more than this tonight. A few guests chuckled. Her mother smiled. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my son Nathan. He lowered his eyes and said nothing. That silence hurt more than Madison's laughter ever could. So I simply smiled and said, I hope you spend it wisely. Then I walked away, because Madison hadn't looked closely at those bills yet. And when she finally noticed what I had written on one of them, nobody at that wedding was laughing anymore. Before I tell you what she found, tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? I'd love to know where you're watching from, and what time it is there. And if stories about family dignity and the consequences of our choices mean something to you, please like and subscribe. Stay with me because that little $50 bill was about to change everything. 3 years before Madison stood in that ballroom, holding my wedding gift, like it was something embarrassing. I would have told you I was lucky, not wealthy, not important, just lucky. My husband Thomas and I had been married for 42 years. We lived in the same brick house in Richmond, Virginia. For most of that time raised one son there, argued over paint colors there, celebrated birthdays there, and sat together on the back porch almost every evening once the weather turned warm. Thomas owned a small construction company, nothing glamorous. He built additions, renovated old houses, repaired roofs, and occasionally took on commercial projects when the right opportunity came along. I kept the books. For 34 years, I knew exactly how much money came into that company and exactly how quickly it could disappear again. Thomas used to joke that he built the houses and I made sure we could afford to keep ours. We were careful people. That didn't mean we were poor. It meant we understood the difference between having money and needing other people to know you had money. Thomas drove his pickup until it had nearly 200,000 miles on it. I bought good shoes and wore them until the soles gave out. We took vacations, but we planned for them. We helped Nathan through college, but we also expected him to work summers. And when he graduated without student debt, Thomas told him something I never forgot. Money should give you choices, son. It shouldn't become the reason you make them. Nathan rolled his eyes the way young men sometimes do when their fathers give them advice. But I thought he understood. For a long time I believed he did. Nathan was 36 when Thomas died. It happened faster than either of us had expected. 1 month we were talking about replacing the old deck behind the house. And a few months later, I was sitting beside a hospital bed holding Thomas's hand while the life we had built together quietly ended. There are some kinds of grief that don't arrive all at once. They move into your house. They sit in your husband's chair. They wait beside you when you make coffee for 2 people out of habit. For the first 6 months after Thomas died, I couldn't bring myself to move his work boots from beside the garage door. Nathan was the person who got me through those months. He called every morning on his way to work. Coffee yet, Mom? Every morning the same question. I'm holding the cup. Breakfast, I'll get there. You always say that, and you always call before 8. That became our routine. Nathan came over on Saturdays to mow the lawn, even though I repeatedly told him I could hire someone. He changed the furnace filter. He fixed the loose handle on my kitchen cabinet. Once after a thunderstorm, he drove across town at nearly 11 at night because I mentioned that the basement window looked like it might be leaking. He was exhausted when he arrived. I remember standing at the door in my robe and saying, "Nathan, I said it might be leaking. I didn't say the house was sinking." He smiled. "Dad would haunt me if I let your basement flood." That nearly broke me. For a moment he looked so much like Thomas that I had to turn away. Nathan saw it. He put down his toolbox and hugged me without saying anything. That was my son. That was the man I believed Thomas and I had raised. Which is why when he told me he had met someone, I was happy. Truly happy. It had been almost a year since Thomas died. Nathan had dated before, but nobody had ever seemed permanent. I worried that after his father's death, he had begun organizing too much of his life around me. I didn't want that. A mother can be grateful for her child's attention and still know she shouldn't become his whole world. Her name, he told me, was Madison. They had met through work. Nathan was managing the renovation of a commercial property, and Madison represented a client who was considering leasing space nearby. She argues about everything, he told me over dinner one evening. I smiled. And naturally you fell in love. I didn't say love. You didn't have to. His face turned red. That made me laugh for the first time in days. A few weeks later, he brought Madison to my house for Sunday dinner. My first impression was that she was beautiful. Not simply pretty, polished. She wore a cream-colored coat that looked as though it had never touched the back of a restaurant chair, and her dark hair fell perfectly around her shoulders. She carried a bottle of wine and a bouquet of white tulips. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, smiling warmly. "Nathan talks about you constantly." "Ariana," I corrected. "Mrs. Brooks makes me feel like you're here to discuss my property taxes." She laughed, and I liked her immediately. I wish I could tell you there was something obvious that evening. Some cruel remark, some expression that warned me. There wasn't. Madison helped clear the plates. She asked about Thomas. And unlike many people who become uncomfortable when a widow mentions her husband, Madison listened. She looked at the framed photograph on my mantel of Thomas and me on our 35th anniversary. "You two look so happy," she said. We were. Then she touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry you lost him." There was nothing false in her voice that I could hear. After dinner, she complimented the house. "This neighborhood has changed so much," she said. "It has." "How long have you owned this place?" 31 years. Her eyebrows rose. "That must mean you bought before prices really took off." I nodded. Nathan groaned. "Careful, Mom. You got her started." Madison laughed. "Sorry. Occupational hazard. I see houses and immediately start estimating value." She was a real estate agent. Of course she thought about property values. There was nothing strange about that. At least that was what I told myself. She walked through the living room, slowly admiring the original hardwood floors. "Have you ever thought about selling?" "Not seriously. You could probably do very well. I'd also have to live somewhere else." She smiled. "Fair point." Then she looked around again. "Though something smaller might eventually be easier." Nathan interrupted. "Madison, what I'm not trying to move your mother." She laughed again and squeezed my shoulder. I laughed too. It was harmless. At the time. Over the next several months, Madison became a regular part of our lives. She remembered my birthday. She invited me to brunch. She brought over soup when I caught a bad cold. Most importantly, Nathan seemed happier than I had seen him since Thomas died. That mattered to me. But every now and then, Madison would ask a question that stayed in my mind longer than it should have. One afternoon, the three of us were sitting on my back porch when she asked whether Thomas had carried life insurance. The question came in the middle of a conversation about Nathan changing his own insurance policy. I answered honestly. "Yes." "That's good," she said. "At least he made sure you were protected. He always did." "Was it enough that you don't have to worry about money?" Nathan immediately looked uncomfortable. "Madison." She frowned. "What?" "You can't ask Mom that." I wasn't asking for a number. She turned to me. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be intrusive." I waved it away, but I noticed. Another time she asked whether I had a mortgage, then whether I had considered a retirement community, then whether Nathan was executor of Thomas's estate. Each question could be explained. Madison worked in real estate. She talked about finances constantly. Her clients discussed mortgages, inheritances, trusts, divorces, downsizing. And she wasn't only curious about me. She commented on everyone. A couple at a restaurant walked past our table one evening, and Madison glanced at the woman's handbag. "That's at least $6,000. I stared at her. "For a purse?" She laughed. "Ariana, don't sound so horrified. For $6,000, that purse should carry me." Nathan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Madison did too. But then she added, "You can tell a lot about people by what they're willing to spend on themselves." That sentence bothered me. I didn't argue. I simply filed it away. Thomas used to say I had an accountant's mind even outside the office. I didn't just remember numbers, I remembered inconsistencies, and slowly I began collecting them. Madison admired wealthy clients more than kind ones. She knew which neighborhoods mattered socially. She noticed watches, cars, handbags, schools. Once after meeting one of Nathan's coworkers and his wife, she said in the car, "They're nice, but you can tell they'll probably always be middle class." I looked out the window. There was nothing wrong with being ambitious. Thomas had been ambitious. So had I. But our ambition had always been about building security. Madison seemed increasingly connected to being seen. Still, whenever doubt crept in, I looked at Nathan. He loved her, and I loved him. So I kept my concerns to myself. One Sunday evening after Madison left early to meet a client, Nathan stayed behind to help me carry some boxes into the attic. As we came downstairs, he stopped beside the framed photograph of Thomas. "Dad would have liked her, don't you think?" There was such hope in his face that I couldn't bring myself to answer immediately. "I think your father would have wanted you to be happy." Nathan smiled. "That's not what I asked." "I know," he studied me. "Do you like her?" Yes. That was true. I did like Madison. I simply wasn't sure I understood her yet. Nathan nodded, satisfied. Then he hugged me goodbye and left. I stood at the front window and watched his truck disappear down the street. On the table behind me sat a brochure Madison had left earlier that afternoon for a luxury condominium development. She had circled one of the units and written beside it. Someday I picked it up. The price was almost $900,000. Nathan couldn't afford anything close to that. I knew because I knew roughly what he earned, what he had saved, and what Thomas and I had taught him about debt. I put the brochure down. At that moment, I still believed Madison's questions about my house, Thomas's insurance, and my finances were merely the habits of an ambitious young real estate agent. I wanted to believe that, because the alternative would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. Madison might not simply have been wondering what Nathan could build with her. She might already have been wondering what he would someday inherit from me. And less than a year later, one street name would make me wonder the same thing: Hawthorne Avenue. Nathan proposed to Madison 11 months after that Sunday dinner. He called me before he told anyone else. "Mom, are you sitting down?" I was standing in the kitchen peeling potatoes. "Should I be?" I asked her. For one terrible second. Because I was a mother, and mothers can imagine disaster faster than anyone. I thought he meant he had asked Madison something about money. Then I heard the happiness in his voice. She said yes. I put the knife down. "Oh, Nathan." I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. Whatever concerns I had about Madison, my son loved her. And I had promised myself after Thomas died that grief would not make me suspicious of every new person who entered our family. So I chose joy. When last night? And you waited until this morning to tell me. I thought calling at midnight might scare you. You've known me 39 years and you still think I sleep. He laughed. It was the kind of laugh I had missed hearing from him. 3 days later, Nathan and Madison came over for dinner. Madison held out her left hand before she had even taken off her coat. The diamond was beautiful, large but tasteful. "At least tell me you like it," Nathan said. "I love it." Madison kissed my cheek. "We're thinking October." "That soon," she grinned. "Why wait?" I hugged her. "Then October it is." At first, wedding planning was fun. Madison sent me photographs of dresses and flowers. She asked whether I preferred chicken or beef for the reception. She invited me to visit venues. But within 6 weeks, the wedding stopped sounding like a celebration and started sounding like the opening of a luxury hotel. The first venue Madison loved was a historic estate outside Richmond, with sweeping lawns, a stone terrace, and a ballroom large enough for nearly 200 guests. I knew what places like that cost. I had spent 34 years paying invoices. "What happened to the little vineyard you liked?" I asked. Madison glanced at Nathan. "It was pretty, but this feels more like us." I almost asked which part of Nathan felt like imported crystal and a string quartet. I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Have you made a budget?" Nathan answered quickly. "Yes." Madison answered at the same time. More or less. I looked at my son. He looked away. That was the first time I felt real concern. Over the following months, the guest list grew. Then came custom invitations. Then upgraded linens. Then a photographer Madison said was an investment. I remember asking how wedding photographs produced income. Madison laughed. You know what I mean, Ariana. I genuinely don't. Nathan kicked me lightly beneath the table. I smiled. But inside I was calculating. I couldn't help it. Bookkeeping gets into your bones. I knew Nathan's salary. I knew approximately what his starter home cost and how much mortgage remained. I knew he had a truck payment. I also knew Madison earned commissions, which meant some months were excellent and others weren't. The numbers didn't match the wedding they were planning. One afternoon, Nathan came to my house alone to help move an old cabinet. His phone was lying on the kitchen counter when the screen lit up. I wasn't trying to read it, but the notification was large enough that I couldn't avoid seeing it. Payment due. Underneath was the name of a credit card company. Nathan grabbed the phone quickly. You're carrying a balance, he sighed. Mom. That means yes. It's temporary. How temporary? He walked to the refrigerator and opened it even though I knew perfectly well he wasn't hungry. Wedding stuff. I folded my arms. Nathan, we're fine. Those two words have probably preceded more financial disasters than any others in the English language. How much he shut the refrigerator. I'm not discussing my credit cards with my mother. Good. Discuss them with your fiancé. We have. And he rubbed his forehead. We'll handle it. I could hear Thomas in my head. Dead is tomorrow's work already spent. I wanted to say it. Instead I said, don't begin a marriage trying to impress people who aren't paying your bills. Nathan's expression hardened slightly. This isn't about impressing anyone. What is it about? Madison works with high-end clients. Her family has expectations. And what are your expectations? He didn't answer immediately. That worried me more than the credit card. Finally, he said, I want her to have the wedding she wants. There was love in that sentence. But there was fear too, fear of disappointing her. I recognized it because I had seen that same fear in some of Thomas's employees over the years, men who bought trucks they couldn't afford because everyone else at the job site had newer ones. There is a dangerous moment when wanting something becomes needing other people to see you have it. I wondered whether Nathan was approaching that line. A month later, I discovered he had taken out a personal loan. He didn't tell me directly. He mentioned consolidating some expenses during dinner, and when I asked what that meant, Madison answered for him. It's just smart cash flow management. I nearly smiled. Thomas would have enjoyed that phrase. He used to say debt always sounded friendlier after someone gave it a business name. But I kept that thought to myself. We're not irresponsible, Madison continued. I didn't say you were. Her expression softened. I know. I just feel like sometimes you think we're spending too much. I looked at Nathan, then at her. I think a wedding lasts one day. A marriage has to survive the bills afterward. Nathan stared at his plate. Madison smiled politely. We'll be fine. There were those words again. The conversation moved on. Or at least theirs did. Mine stayed with me. A few weeks later, they invited me to dinner at their house. Madison had spent the afternoon showing properties to clients, and real estate dominated the conversation. She talked about a couple moving from Washington who had paid cash for a house in Windsor Farms. Then she mentioned another client who had lost a bidding war. Richmond isn't what it used to be, she said. If you wait, you're punished. Nathan laughed. She's trying to convince me we need to move. You do need to move, Madison replied. You hate my house that much. I don't hate it. She looked around the dining room. Nathan had bought that little house 6 years earlier. It was modest, comfortable, and in a perfectly good neighborhood. Madison took a sip of wine. It's just a starter home. Nathan smiled at me. Apparently, I've failed to graduate. Madison laughed. You know what I mean. Then she looked at me. Don't you think they eventually need a real house? The word real bothered me. I set down my fork. What makes this one imaginary? Nathan laughed. Madison rolled her eyes. You two are impossible. But then she became serious. If we're going to have children someday, I want more space. Better schools. Somewhere with long-term value. That at least I understood. There is nothing wrong with planning, I said. Exactly. She leaned forward. And there are still neighborhoods where you can get ahead of the market if you know what's coming. Something changed in her voice. Professional excitement. She started listing areas where developers were buying older properties. Scott's addition is already ridiculous. Some parts of Manchester are still moving. But there are smaller pockets people aren't paying attention to yet. Nathan nodded as if he understood. I mostly listened. Then Madison said it. Hawthorne Avenue. My hand stopped halfway toward my water glass. It was such a small movement that Nathan didn't notice. Madison did not either. She was too excited. Hawthorne, Nathan repeated. You know that stretch south of the old warehouse district, kind of. Developers have been quietly buying parcels around there for months. Nothing huge has been announced yet, but something is happening. I lowered my glass carefully. How do you know? Madison looked at me. Real estate people gossip more than hairdressers. She smiled. There's talk about mixed-use redevelopment. Retail apartments, maybe office space. If zoning changes the way people expect, some of those old properties could double. Nathan whistled. Maybe we should buy one. Too late for most of the good parcels. Madison took another sip of wine. But anyone who already owns there would be crazy to sell without knowing what's coming. I said nothing. Because 18 years earlier, Thomas and I had purchased a small aging house on Hawthorne Avenue, and Madison had no idea. Neither did Nathan. That surprised people whenever they later heard the story. How could our only son not know we owned another property? The answer was simple. Thomas and I did not discuss every financial decision with our adult child. Nathan knew his father occasionally invested in property through the construction business. He didn't know which properties remained, which had been sold, or how ownership had changed over the years. After Thomas died, Nathan never asked, and I never volunteered the information. The house on Hawthorne had become something private between Thomas and me, more memory than investment. Madison continued talking. If I owned anything there, I'd sit on it. How much are we talking? Nathan asked. Depends on the parcel. She shrugged. Some houses look like they're worth $200,000, but the dirt underneath could eventually be worth 3 times that to the right buyer. The dirt underneath. That phrase stayed with me, because Thomas had said something remarkably similar the day we bought our property. Never look only at the house, Ari. Sometimes the future is in the ground underneath it. I hadn't thought about that sentence in years. Madison was still talking. If the redevelopment happens, someone is going to make a fortune simply because they bought at the right time. She smiled at Nathan. That's what I mean when I say we need to think bigger. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. We will. I watched them. For the first time, I wondered exactly what bigger meant to Madison. A larger house, a better neighborhood, more money, or simply a life that looked expensive enough from the outside. After dinner, Nathan walked me to my car. You okay? Of course. You got quiet. Your fiancé talks fast. I was trying to keep up. He smiled. Occupational hazard. I kissed his cheek. Good night, sweetheart. I drove home through the cool Virginia evening, but instead of turning toward my house, I found myself taking a familiar road I hadn't driven in months. 20 minutes later, I slowed near Hawthorne Avenue. The neighborhood had changed. Construction fencing surrounded 2 lots. An old auto shop had been demolished. Across the street from the property Thomas and I had purchased nearly 2 decades earlier stood a large sign announcing a public zoning hearing. I pulled over. The little house was still there. The porch Thomas had repaired. The windows I had helped him paint. A lamp glowed behind the curtains because Helen Parker, the widow who had rented from us for years, was home. To anyone passing by, it was simply an aging house on an ordinary street. But I knew something Madison didn't. 3 weeks earlier, a developer had sent me a letter. Then another. Then he had called Richard Coleman, our attorney. The latest offer for my little house on Hawthorne Avenue was $740,000. I had said no. Sitting in my car that night, I looked at the porch and thought about Nathan. Then I thought about Madison saying they needed a real house. For the first time, an idea entered my mind. At that point, it was only an idea. A generous one. A mother's idea. I had no way of knowing that within a year, that little house would become the secret hidden behind four $50 bills. And that before Madison ever learned what I owned, she would show me exactly what she believed I was worth. The little house on Hawthorne Avenue had never looked like the kind of property that could change anyone's life. That was part of what made the whole thing so strange. It was a narrow two-story house with faded red brick, a covered front porch, and a maple tree that had grown so large its branches stretched over half the roof. The kitchen was small. The upstairs hallway creaked. One bedroom had a window that never sat perfectly straight in its frame no matter how many times Thomas tried to fix it. But when I looked at that house, I never saw square footage. I saw my husband. Thomas found the property 18 years earlier while doing renovation work for a contractor in that part of Richmond. At the time, Hawthorne Avenue was not somewhere real estate agents described with words like opportunity or redevelopment. It was simply an older working-class street. Some houses were cared for beautifully, others had been neglected for years. There was a small auto shop at one end of the block, a laundromat around the corner, and an abandoned warehouse several streets away. One evening, Thomas came home from work carrying a folded sheet of paper. He put it beside my dinner plate. "What is this A house? I can see that. It's for sale." I looked at him. "We already have a house." "I know. Then I'm missing something." Thomas smiled. That smile always worried me. It was the smile he wore whenever he had already made an emotional decision and was hoping I could make the numbers agree with him. The property belonged to an elderly man whose wife had recently died. He was moving to Ohio to live with his daughter and wanted a quick sale. The house needed work, a lot of work. Thomas thought we could buy it cheaply, renovate it ourselves, and either rent it or sell it later. How cheaply, I asked. He told me. I looked at the paper again. Then I started calculating. That was how our marriage worked. Thomas saw possibility. I saw columns. He saw what something could become. I figured out whether we could survive getting it there. 2 days later, we toured the property. I remember standing in the kitchen and staring at water damage near the ceiling. "This is your brilliant investment. Look past the ceiling." "I can't. It may fall on me." He laughed. "The roof needs replacing. The roof needs praying for." "Ari, what, come outside?" He led me into the backyard. It was larger than I expected. The lot stretched deeper than most of the neighboring properties. Thomas pointed toward the alley behind it. "That's what I like. The alley, the land." I folded my arms. "You're buying dirt now?" He smiled. "Never look only at the house, Ari. Sometimes the future is in the ground underneath it." I shook my head. "You've been talking to developers again." "I'm serious." "So am I. Dirt doesn't pay property taxes. But we bought it." For months, Hawthorne Avenue became our second home. Thomas replaced the roof with help from 2 of his employees. I painted trim. He refinished the floors. I complained about the dust. He complained that I painted too slowly. We ate sandwiches sitting on overturned buckets because we hadn't brought chairs. Those were some of the happiest months of our marriage. Not because the work was easy, because we were building something together without knowing exactly what it would become. Originally, Thomas intended to sell the house. Then we met Helen Parker. Helen came by one Saturday afternoon while I was painting the porch railing. She was in her 50s, then recently widowed, and working in the administrative office of a local elementary school. She asked whether the house would be available to rent. Thomas told her we were probably selling. Helen nodded politely. Then she said, "If you change your mind, I'd be interested." That should have been the end of it. Instead, Thomas asked her why she wanted that particular house. Helen looked across the street. "My sister used to live 2 blocks from here. I know the neighborhood." Then she hesitated. "My husband handled most of our finances. I'm trying to figure out what I can afford on my own." I saw something change in Thomas's face. He looked at me. I already knew what was coming. Later that evening, he said, "Maybe we rent it." At market rate, he made a face. "Thomas, what you're doing, the thing." "What thing?" The thing where you pretend you're making a business decision when you've already decided to help somebody. He laughed. Helen moved in 6 weeks later. She stayed, year after year. We raised the rent occasionally, but never as much as we could have. Thomas would look at comparable rents and say, "We're doing fine." I would remind him that fine was not a financial strategy. Then I would renew Helen's lease anyway. The house paid for itself. That was enough. Over time, Hawthorne Avenue became almost invisible in our finances. It wasn't a major source of income. It wasn't something we bragged about. Nathan knew his father had bought and sold a few properties over the years, but he had no reason to keep track of them. Thomas and I believed something very strongly. Adult children did not need a running inventory of their parents' assets. We paid for Nathan's education. We helped him when he genuinely needed help. But we never raised him to count our money as his future money. At least I thought we hadn't. Years passed. The neighborhood slowly changed. A coffee shop replaced an old convenience store. Young couples began buying neglected houses. A developer purchased the abandoned warehouse. Property taxes climbed. Then Thomas got sick. During those final months, Hawthorne Avenue was the last thing on my mind. After his funeral, paperwork arrived in waves. Insurance, bank accounts, business records, titles, tax documents. That was when Richard Coleman became more than simply our attorney. Richard had known Thomas for almost 25 years. He had helped with business contracts, property transactions, and eventually Thomas's estate planning. About 2 months after the funeral, I sat across from him in his office while he explained everything Thomas had left behind. When he reached Hawthorne Avenue, I almost smiled. I'd forgotten about that house. Richard raised an eyebrow. Helen hasn't. That made me laugh. It was one of the first real laughs I'd had since Thomas died. The property passed fully to me. No complicated trust. No shared ownership. No claim from Nathan. Mine. Richard asked whether I wanted to sell. I said no. At the time, I couldn't have explained why. Maybe because Thomas had loved that little house. Maybe because Helen still needed it. Or maybe because selling it felt like closing another door to a life I wasn't ready to leave. So I kept it. Then Richmond started changing faster. Developers moved closer. Properties that had once attracted little attention suddenly became valuable because of what could be built around them. The first serious offer came about 2 years before Nathan's wedding, $480,000. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I called Richard. "Is this real, Very? For that house, for that parcel?" Thomas's voice came back to me. "Sometimes the future is in the ground underneath it." I declined. 6 months later, another offer arrived, 560,000, then 615. By the time Madison casually mentioned Hawthorne Avenue over dinner, a development company had offered me $740,000. Richard thought I could potentially get more. "The zoning activity matters," he told me. "How much more I don't know yet." I leaned back in his office chair. Thomas would be unbearable right now. Richard laughed. He'd frame the first offer and tell everyone he predicted it. He did predict it. That makes it worse. Despite the money, I still wasn't ready to sell. There was also Helen. She had lived there for nearly 18 years. I wasn't going to put a 73-year-old widow out of her home simply because a developer had discovered my land was useful. When I told Richard that, he nodded. Thomas would agree. I know. Then several months later, Helen called me. She was moving. Her younger sister in North Carolina had undergone surgery and didn't want to live alone anymore. Helen had decided to join her permanently. "I wanted to tell you early," she said. "Probably sometime after Nathan's wedding." I sat quietly at my kitchen table. "After Nathan's wedding? When did you decide? Last week? Are you sure? I think it's time." Then she laughed softly. "And you have charged me far too little rent for far too long. Don't tell Richard. He already knows." That surprised me. Apparently everyone had been discussing my bad business habits behind my back. After we hung up, I walked to the window. For the first time in 18 years, Hawthorne Avenue would soon be empty. I could sell. I could renovate again. I could continue renting it. Or I could do something else entirely. That evening, I drove past Nathan's starter home. His truck was in the driveway. Madison's car was parked beside it. Through the front window, I could see them moving around the kitchen. They were building a life together. A complicated, expensive, imperfect life. I thought about their wedding debt. I thought about Madison saying they needed a real house. I thought about Nathan working hard all those years. And despite the questions I had begun to carry about Madison, I felt the instinct mothers sometimes struggle hardest to control. I wanted to help my child. Not rescue him. Not make him dependent. Just give him a foundation. A mortgage-free house could change the first decade of their marriage. They could pay off their other debt. Save. Have children without worrying about housing. Build the kind of security Thomas and I had spent decades creating. The next morning I called Richard. I think I know what I want to do with Hawthorne. There was a pause. Sell no. Keep renting no. Another pause. Then he said, "All right, Ariana. What are you thinking?" I looked at the photograph of Thomas on my desk. "I want to give it to Nathan as a wedding gift." Richard didn't answer immediately. That should have told me something. Finally he said, "That's a very generous gift. He's our son." "I know. You sound worried. I'm a lawyer. Worry is how I bill." I laughed. But Richard didn't. Then he asked me a question I would remember later. "Does Nathan know no? Does Madison number good?" I frowned. "Why is that good?" "Because before you transfer something this valuable, I'd like you to be certain you're giving it because you want to, not because anyone expects it." At the time, I thought Richard was being overly cautious. I had no idea how important those words would become. Because the house on Hawthorne Avenue was mine. The paperwork had not been signed. Nathan and Madison knew nothing about it. And that meant I still had time to discover something more valuable than the property itself. I had time to discover who they were when they believed I had nothing impressive to give them. For several days after I told Richard I wanted to give Nathan the Hawthorne house as a wedding gift, I felt lighter than I had in months. It seemed right. Not because the property had become valuable, but because Thomas had found it. Thomas had believed in it when almost nobody else did. And now, years after his death, that little house could give our son something his father would have wanted him to have. Security. A beginning. A place where money didn't have to dictate every decision. I could almost hear Thomas teasing me. "You finally admit I was right about the dirt." I would have told him not to get used to it. The following Tuesday, I drove to Richard Coleman's office downtown. Richard had already pulled the Hawthorne file. It was thick. 18 years of leases, tax documents, repairs, insurance records, title work, and correspondence with developers had turned one modest house into nearly 3 inches of paper. Richard tapped the folder. "Before we do anything, I want you to understand exactly what you're giving away." "I understand. I don't think you do." I gave him a look. "I kept books for 34 years, Richard. And that's exactly why I'm surprised you're treating $740,000 like a casserole." I laughed. "I'm not treating it like a casserole. You're giving it to your son, my only son, which doesn't make it less valuable." He slid a document toward me. It was a recent market analysis. The number at the bottom was higher than the developer's offer. Not dramatically higher, but enough to make me sit back. "This isn't an appraisal," Richard said. "But based on nearby acquisitions and potential zoning changes, I would not be shocked if that parcel eventually crossed 800,000. I looked at the figure. For a moment, the bookkeeper in me took over. I thought about what that money could earn if invested, what it could mean for retirement, how much assisted living might cost someday, how long I could live comfortably without ever asking Nathan for a dime. Richard watched me carefully. "Still want to give it away?" I thought about Nathan as a little boy sitting beside Thomas on the garage floor handing him tools. I thought about the first apartment Nathan rented after college and how proud he had been to pay for it himself. I thought about him standing beside his father at the hospital trying not to cry. "Yes." Richard sighed. "You Brooks people are exhausting. You loved Thomas." I did. He was also exhausting. That made me smile. Richard turned serious again. "I can prepare the transfer, but I recommend we don't record anything until Helen has moved out and you've made a final decision." "Why?" Because circumstances change. What circumstances? Any circumstances. He leaned back. A wedding is emotional. You're grieving Thomas not being there. Nathan is your only child. You're trying to connect your husband's memory to an important day. All understandable. But once that deed is transferred, your feelings no longer matter. I didn't like the way that sounded. My feelings matter, not to the county recorder. I folded my hands. So what do you suggest we prepare everything? We wait. After the wedding, after Helen moves, you confirm. Then we execute. I considered it. That seemed reasonable. Fine. And don't tell them yet. I frowned. Why are you so determined to keep it secret? Because surprise is safer than expectation. That sentence stayed with me. I didn't understand how much truth was inside it until later. Richard began explaining the paperwork, but my attention drifted to the Hawthorne file. Something about the house still felt incomplete as a wedding gift. Not financially, emotionally. A deed was useful. But Thomas had never been very good at giving gifts in ordinary ways. Every Christmas he hid mine somewhere ridiculous. One year he put a bracelet inside an empty cereal box. Another year he wrapped a new set of gardening gloves inside the box from a vacuum cleaner just to watch my expression. And whenever he gave Nathan money, he had another tradition. He wrote on it. It started when Nathan was 8. Thomas gave him a $5 bill for helping clean the garage. Nathan ran toward the corner store. Thomas called him back. Look at the money. Nathan stared at it. It's $5. Look closer. Near the edge, Thomas had written in tiny letters, "First money earned with your own hands. Don't waste all of it." Nathan read it twice. Then he put the bill in his pocket. That evening he asked me for a jar. What for? I'm saving $3. Thomas heard him and winked at me. After that it became a family tradition. Birthday money came with messages. So did graduation money. When Nathan turned 16, Thomas gave him $50. Written along the edge, gas disappears. Memories don't. Take someone somewhere worth remembering. When Nathan graduated from high school, another $50 bill said, "Spend this celebrating tonight. Tomorrow start building something." Nathan kept that one. Years later, when he moved into his first apartment, Thomas gave him a $100 bill. On it he wrote, "For the first thing that breaks, something always breaks." 2 days later, Nathan called us because the toilet wouldn't stop running. Thomas laughed for 10 minutes. After Thomas died, I found several of those bills in a small wooden box Nathan had left in his childhood bedroom. He hadn't spent them. I sat on the edge of his old bed holding them and crying. That was when the idea came to me. The deed could come later. The wedding gift itself should speak in Thomas's language. Money with a message. I stopped at my bank on the way home from Richard's office and withdrew $200 in $50 bills. 4 bills. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would reveal what was behind them. At my kitchen table that evening, I spread them out. For several minutes I couldn't decide what to write. Congratulations seemed too ordinary. Thomas would have made it personal. I tried to imagine him sitting across from me. What would you write? I could almost see him shrug, make him look twice. I smiled. Then I picked up a fine point pen. On the white margin of one bill I wrote carefully, "For the house on Hawthorne. Ask Mr. Coleman before you spend this. Love, Mom." I stared at it. The words were small enough that someone counting the money quickly might miss them. Nathan wouldn't. At least I didn't think he would. He knew his father's tradition. I imagined him finding the message. I imagined his face changing. Maybe he would look at me across the reception. Maybe he would understand immediately that Thomas was part of the gift. He wouldn't know what Hawthorne meant, but that was part of the surprise. The following morning I called Richard. "I've changed the presentation." "The what?" "The wedding gift." "Ariana, please don't tell me you've put a deed inside a cake." Thomas would have liked that. He absolutely would have. That's why I'm concerned. I laughed and explained the 4 $50 bills. Richard was quiet. Then he said, "That's actually rather sweet. Don't sound so surprised. I've known you too long." I told him exactly what I had written. "For the house on Hawthorne. Ask Mr. Coleman before you spend this. Another pause. Richard, I'm here. You don't like it, I like it. But I want one thing clear. What? If Nathan calls me after the wedding, I explain only that you've been considering transferring the property. Nothing is final until you tell me. I know. Say it. I rolled my eyes even though he couldn't see me. Nothing is final until I tell you. Good. You're very dramatic for an attorney. Occupational hazard. I placed the 4 bills inside a cream-colored envelope. On the front, I wrote Nathan and Madison, with all my love, Mom. Then I put it in the top drawer of my desk. For the next few weeks, every time I passed that desk, I thought about the gift. I pictured Nathan and Madison standing on the porch of Hawthorne, maybe with children someday, maybe complaining about the creaky upstairs floor. Maybe Nathan would repair the crooked bedroom window the way Thomas never quite managed to. I wanted that future for him. Despite my doubts about Madison, I still believed marriage might settle some of her restless ambition. I told myself she was young. I told myself her obsession with status came from working in luxury real estate. I told myself Nathan loved her for reasons I might not always see. And most of all, I told myself that generosity should not become suspicion simply because the gift was large. Then the wedding planning entered its final months. And something began to change. Not suddenly. That would have been easier. It happened through little remarks, little exclusions, little moments. When Madison looked at me as though I were not Nathan's mother, but an inconvenient detail in the picture she was creating. The first came during a dress fitting. I had found a navy blue dress I loved. Simple, elegant, comfortable. When Madison saw a photograph, she stared at it for several seconds. That's what you're wearing, I was planning to. She smiled, but it wasn't the smile I had known when Nathan first brought her to dinner. It's just very understated. I am understated, I know. The way she said it made the words sound like a diagnosis. Then she suggested I let her stylist find something more suitable for the photographs. I laughed it off. But driving home, I felt something uncomfortable settle in my chest. That evening, I opened my desk drawer. The envelope was still there. 4 $50 bills, 1 handwritten message, and behind that message, a mortgage-free house that might eventually be worth close to $1 million. For the first time since creating the gift, I didn't smile when I looked at it. I remembered Richard's warning, surprise is safer than expectation. Then I remembered something Thomas used to say whenever someone showed too much interest in what another person owned. If you want to know what people value, don't watch them when they think you're useful. Watch them when they think you have nothing they want. I closed the drawer. I wasn't ready to change the gift. Not yet. But I was beginning to wonder whether Thomas had left me one final lesson without ever knowing I would need it. Because Madison thought she knew exactly what kind of woman I was. A retired bookkeeper, a widow in an old brick house, a mother with simple clothes and modest habits. And as our wedding day drew closer, she was becoming increasingly comfortable showing me exactly how much respect she believed a woman like that deserved. The navy blue dress should have been a small thing. For most of my life, clothing had been exactly that, a small thing. Thomas used to tell me I could walk into a department store with $500 in my purse and somehow come out with the same $500 and one blouse from the clearance rack. I considered that a compliment. Madison did not. 2 weeks after she saw the photograph of the dress I planned to wear to the wedding, she called me on a Tuesday morning. I made you an appointment. I was standing in the grocery store comparing 2 brands of coffee. For what, my stylist? I put one bag back on the shelf. Madison, I already have a dress. I know, but I thought we could have options. She laughed lightly. You know what I mean. Unfortunately, I was beginning to. I tried to decline politely. Madison insisted. The photographs are forever, Ariana. So is the mortgage if Nathan keeps paying for this wedding. Silence. It lasted only a second, but I heard it. Then Madison laughed. You're funny. I hadn't been joking. Still, I agreed to the appointment because I didn't want another disagreement over something as meaningless as fabric. The boutique was in a fashionable part of Richmond, the kind of place where there were no price tags visible because apparently asking what something cost was considered poor manners. Madison was already there when I arrived. So was her mother, Patricia Reynolds. Patricia looked elegant even while sitting. I don't know how else to describe her. She had the posture of someone who had spent her entire life expecting people to notice when she entered a room. "Ariana," she said warmly. "How exciting." I smiled. "For somebody." Madison handed me a dress. It was pale silver, heavily beaded, and much more elaborate than anything I would have chosen. I looked at the tag hidden inside. Then I looked again. "Does this come with a used car?" Madison laughed. Patricia didn't. "It photographs beautifully," she said. "I'm sure it does. I tried it on. It fit." That was the nicest thing I could say about it. When I stepped out of the dressing room, Madison tilted her head. "Oh, that's much better. Better. Not beautiful, not lovely. Better." I looked at myself in the mirror. For one strange moment, I felt like I was being edited. The dress wasn't for me. It was for the wedding photographs. For Madison's idea of how the mother of the groom should look standing beside her. "I prefer the navy," I said. Madison's smile tightened. "Ariana, the navy is a little plain. I am a little plain." Patricia gave a soft laugh. "There's nothing wrong with wanting to look your best. I do look my best in the navy." Madison came closer. "It's just that there will be clients there. People from work. Some fairly important people." I turned toward her. "And—" She hesitated. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The message was clear. This wedding wasn't only a marriage. It was a presentation. And apparently, I was one of the items being presented. I bought neither dress. I wore the navy one. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, Madison invited me to a luncheon with several women from the wedding party. I arrived 15 minutes early. Madison was standing near the entrance talking to one of her bridesmaids. They didn't see me immediately. "I just need everything to look cohesive," Madison was saying. The bridesmaid laughed. "You mean expensive?" Madison smiled. "I mean polished." Then she saw me. Her expression changed instantly. "Ariana, you're early. I have a lifelong fear of being late." She hugged me. I hugged her back. But the word polished followed me to the table. During lunch, one of the women asked what I had done before retiring. "Bookkeeping," I said. "For my husband's construction company." Before I could say anything else, Madison jumped in. She basically ran the whole operation. That was generous. Then she added, "But she's retired now." The woman smiled. "That must have been interesting. Construction companies can be complicated. They certainly can." I began telling her about managing payroll during the recession when Madison interrupted. "Ariana has the best stories, but we could be here all afternoon." Everyone laughed. I did too. What else was I supposed to do? Later, while we were alone near the restroom, Madison touched my arm. "I hope you don't mind me saying this. That sentence rarely leads anywhere pleasant." "What?" "At the wedding, when people ask what you do, maybe don't go too deep into the bookkeeping thing." I stared at her. "The bookkeeping thing. You know what I mean." "No, Madison, I don't." She lowered her voice. "My mother has invited some executives, developers, a few very high-end clients. I just don't want you to feel like you have to explain your whole work history." For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak. Not because I didn't understand, because I understood perfectly. She was embarrassed. Not by anything I had done, by what I had been, a bookkeeper. The woman who spent more than 3 decades making sure 40 employees got paid on Friday. The woman who sat beside Thomas through recessions when contractors went bankrupt around us. The woman who caught accounting errors that once saved our company nearly $60,000. The woman whose careful records helped build everything my husband eventually left behind. Madison had reduced all of that to the bookkeeping thing. I looked directly at her. "I'm not ashamed of what I did." Her eyes widened. "I didn't say you should be. You didn't have to." "Ariana, you're misunderstanding me." "Then explain it." She sighed. "I just want you to enjoy yourself instead of feeling like you need to justify anything." There it was, a clever reversal. Suddenly, she wasn't embarrassed by me. She was protecting me. I had lived too long to argue with that kind of logic. So I smiled. You don't need to protect me from conversations, Madison. Then I returned to the table. That evening, Nathan called. I knew before he said anything that Madison had spoken to him. Mom, did something happen at... You'll have to be more specific. He sighed. Madison said you got upset. Did she tell you why? She said she made a comment about work, and you took it the wrong way. I closed my eyes. How did I take it, Mom? No. Tell me. He was quiet. Then he said, she's under a lot of stress. I almost laughed. There it was again. The explanation for everything. Madison was stressed. Madison wanted the wedding perfect. Madison worked with demanding clients. Madison's mother had expectations. Every time she crossed a line, Nathan moved the line. I asked you a question, I said. What? How did I take it wrong? He exhaled slowly. She just meant that some of those people can be judgmental. And her solution was for me to hide what I did for 34 years. She didn't say hide. Then what did she say? Another silence. Nathan had always been terrible at lying to me, even as a child. When he was 10, he broke a lamp and told me the cat did it. We didn't own a cat. Now he wasn't lying exactly. He was doing something worse. He was avoiding the truth because the truth was inconvenient. Finally, he said, can we please not make this into something bigger? I looked around my quiet kitchen. On the wall was a photograph of Nathan at his college graduation. Thomas stood on one side. I stood on the other. Neither of us looked polished. Thomas's tie was crooked. My shoes hurt so badly that I had taken them off 5 minutes after the photograph. But Nathan looked proud to stand between us. When had that changed? I'm not making it bigger, I said softly. I'm trying to understand why your fiancé thinks the truth about me needs editing. She doesn't. Then you should have no problem telling her not to do it again. Nathan didn't answer. That was the answer. A few days later, I discovered I had been removed from one of the final planning meetings at the estate. Originally, Madison had asked me to attend. Then the time changed. No one told me. I found out because Patricia casually mentioned the meeting had gone well. When I asked Madison about it, she looked surprised. Oh, I thought Nathan told you. Nathan hadn't. When I asked him, he looked equally confused. I thought Madison told you. It was such a small thing. A meeting about flowers, table arrangements, and timing. But small exclusions have a way of telling larger truths. I began noticing them everywhere. Madison stopped asking my opinion. She referred to the wedding as something our families were hosting, even though Patricia had made it very clear which family she believed was socially important. At the rehearsal dinner planning session, Patricia suggested the speeches should be kept brief and sophisticated. Then she looked at me. I smiled. I'll leave my banjo at home. Nathan nearly choked on his water. Patricia did not laugh. That night I drove home angry, not furious, worse, hurt. There is a particular kind of pain that comes when you realize someone isn't simply overlooking you. They are diminishing you. And there is an even deeper pain when your child watches it happen and keeps asking you to understand. I went into my study, opened the top drawer. The cream-colored envelope was exactly where I had left it. Nathan and Madison. With all my love, Mom. I took out the four $50 bills. On one of them was my handwritten message. For the house on Hawthorne. Ask Mr. Coleman before you spend this. Love, Mom. I sat down. $740,000, possibly more. A mortgage-free beginning. A piece of Thomas. I had been so certain. Now for the first time I wondered whether giving them that house would be an act of love or an act of foolishness. My phone rang. Richard. I almost laughed at the timing. Were your ears burning? That depends. Were you insulting me? I was thinking about Hawthorne. His voice became serious. Changed your mind, I don't know. That's allowed. I feel terrible even considering it. Why? Because Nathan is my son. And I promised myself that house would be their wedding gift. No, Richard said calmly. You decided it might be their wedding gift. I stared at the bills. That sounds like lawyer language. It is. Useful, isn't it? I smiled despite myself. Then Richard said something more gently. Ariana, don't give away something because you're afraid that changing your mind makes you unloving. I swallowed. I'm not afraid of losing the house. I know. I looked at Nathan's name on the envelope. I'm afraid of losing my son. Richard was silent. Then he said, "Those aren't the same thing." After we hung up, I placed the money back inside the envelope. I didn't destroy the note. I didn't call off the transfer. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I would wait until after the wedding, exactly as Richard had suggested. I would watch. I would listen. And I would hope I had misunderstood Madison. More than anything, I would hope Nathan remembered who he was. Because I could forgive a woman for caring too much about appearances. What I didn't know if I could forgive was my son learning to measure his mother's worth through his wife's eyes. And I was about to discover that the wedding wasn't the biggest financial problem Nathan and Madison were hiding. They had already begun planning a future around money neither of them owned. Mine. 1 week before the wedding, Nathan showed up at my house without calling first. That alone told me something was wrong. My son had inherited many things from Thomas, including the belief that arriving unannounced at someone's home was perfectly acceptable if you brought food. This time he brought nothing. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard his key in the front door. "Mom, in here." Nathan walked into the kitchen wearing the same gray work shirt I had seen him wear dozens of times, but he looked different. Tired. Not the ordinary kind of tired that comes after a long day. This was the kind that settles behind your eyes when you've been carrying something too long. "You want tea?" "No." I looked at him. "You're refusing free food or drink in my house. Should I call an ambulance?" Normally he would have smiled. He didn't. "Can we talk?" I turned off the kettle. "Of course." He sat at the kitchen table. I sat across from him. For several seconds, Nathan stared at his hands. Then he said, "The wedding got more expensive than we expected." I waited. I had learned long ago that if you stay quiet, people often tell you more than they planned. "We had some deposits come due at the same time," he continued, "and Madison had 2 closings delayed." "How much trouble are you in?" "We're not in trouble." I raised an eyebrow. He sighed. "Okay, we're stretched." "How stretched, Mom?" "You came here to talk about money. You don't get to become offended when I ask about money." He leaned back. "About 38,000. I thought I had misheard him. $38,000 between the cards and the personal loan. I stared at my son. "Nathan, the wedding hasn't even happened yet. I know. And this doesn't include your mortgage number, truck number, Madison's car, no." I closed my eyes for a moment. $38,000. For 1 day. Thomas would have walked into the backyard and shouted at a tree. "What happened to the budget?" Nathan rubbed his forehead. "Things added up. Things don't add themselves." "I know. Then why didn't you stop?" His jaw tightened. "I didn't come here for a lecture." "Why did you come?" That stopped him. He looked down again. I waited. Finally, he said, "I wanted your advice." I softened. "That was still my son. Then here's my advice. Cancel anything that hasn't been paid for. Reduce whatever can still be reduced. After the wedding, make a repayment plan. No vacations. No new house. No expensive cars. You pay this down before you build another lifestyle on top of it." Nathan nodded slowly. "I told Madison we should postpone the honeymoon." "Good. She doesn't want to." "Then Madison needs to learn that wanting something and being able to afford it are not the same thing." He flinched. I saw it. "What nothing?" "Nathan." He stood and walked toward the kitchen window. For a moment, he looked exactly like Thomas whenever he had bad news. Shoulders tight, hands in his pockets, back turned toward me. "Madison thinks we're going to be okay. That sounds encouraging." "No, I mean financially." I waited. He didn't continue. "Nathan, turn around." He did. There was embarrassment on his face now. Not anger. Embarrassment. "Why does Madison think you're going to be okay?" He hesitated. Then he said, "She thinks there's probably family money." I didn't understand at first. "What family ours?" The kitchen seemed suddenly very quiet. I looked at him. "What exactly does that mean?" Nathan pulled out the chair again and sat down. She knows Dad owned the business. Yes. She knows you sold most of it after he died. Yes. She knows you stayed in this house and you're comfortable. I felt something cold begin to move through me. What else does she know? Nothing specific. Then why are we having this conversation? He rubbed both hands over his face. Madison assumes Dad left you more than you need. I stared at him. There are moments when anger comes quickly. This wasn't one of them. This came as disbelief, slowly, almost politely, as if my mind needed time to understand the insult before my heart could react. She assumes she works with wealthy families all the time, Mom. People plan around inheritance. It's not unusual. I don't care what her clients do. I know. Has she asked you how much I have? Nathan didn't answer. That was answer number one. Have you asked me? No. Have you searched through any of your father's estate documents? His head snapped up. No. I believed him. Then what exactly is Madison planning around? Nathan exhaled. She thinks eventually I'll inherit the house. I looked around my kitchen. My house. The house where Thomas and I had raised him. And he hesitated. She thinks there are probably investments. Probably. And maybe property. My heartbeat changed. I kept my face still. Property. Nathan shrugged. Dad was in construction. He bought things over the years. For one brief second, Hawthorne Avenue flashed through my mind. The porch, the maple tree, the $740,000 offer, the cream-colored envelope in my desk. Did you tell her that I told her Dad sometimes invested in properties? That's all. Does she know about Hawthorne Avenue? Nathan frowned. What about Hawthorne? Relief came so quickly I nearly showed it. Nothing. He studied me. Mom. I was thinking about that conversation at dinner. Oh. I folded my hands on the table. Let me understand this correctly. You and Madison spent $38,000 you don't have because she believes that someday I will die and leave you enough money to make your choices irrelevant. His face went pale. That's not fair. Which part? We didn't spend it because of that. Then why mention inheritance at all? Nathan stood again. Because Madison thinks we're not starting from zero. You're not starting from zero. You have jobs, a house, education, health, each other. You know what I mean. No, sweetheart. I don't think I do. I rarely called him sweetheart when I was angry. He knew that. He sat down again. Madison just wants us to have a good start. I almost laughed. A $38,000 wedding debt is an interesting way to begin one. He looked away. I leaned toward him. Has anyone promised you an inheritance? No. Have I? No. Did your father know? Then you don't have one. He nodded. You understand that? Yes. Does Madison? Another silence. That answer frightened me. Not because Madison wanted money. Most people want money. Money creates safety, comfort, opportunity. What frightened me was entitlement. The quiet belief that something belonging to another person was already part of your future. I thought about all Madison's questions. Life insurance, my mortgage, downsizing, retirement communities, Thomas's estate. I had treated them as isolated moments. Now they formed a line, and that line pointed directly at me. When did she start talking about this? I asked. Nathan looked miserable. A few months ago. Before or after you started going over budget, I don't know. You know. He didn't answer. I felt my disappointment settle deeper. Does Madison believe I should sell this house? She thinks eventually you might want something smaller. That isn't what I asked. Nathan swallowed. Yes. There it was. Why she thinks the equity could be better used. I actually laughed then. Not because anything was funny. Better used by whom, Mom? By me. He said nothing. Or by you. It's not like that. Then tell me what it's like. Nathan pushed his chair back. I shouldn't have come. You absolutely should have. He stared at me. You needed to hear yourself say this out loud. His eyes filled with frustration. I am not waiting for you to die. I didn't say you were. That's what you're making this sound like. No. I'm telling you that your fiancé is building financial expectations around property she does not own, and you're defending it because confronting her would be uncomfortable. That landed. He looked away. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then his voice became quieter. I love her. I know. She isn't a bad person. I didn't say she was. You think she is? No. I meant it. I didn't think Madison was evil. Life is rarely that convenient. I thought she had learned to measure security through possessions and worth through appearances. And I thought my son loved her enough to begin accepting those measurements himself. That scared me far more. Nathan stood. I need to go. I walked him to the front door. Before he left, I touched his arm. Nathan. He turned. Your father and I worked very hard for what we had. I know. We worked hard so you wouldn't have to fear poverty. We did not work hard so you could become comfortable spending money because you expected ours. His eyes dropped. I know. This time I thought he meant it. After he drove away, I went directly to my study. I opened the drawer. The envelope waited there. Nathan and Madison. With all my love, Mom. I took it out. 4 $50 bills. $200 sitting in my hand. Behind those bills was a mortgage-free property worth at least $740,000. I could have called Richard that moment. I could have told him to destroy the transfer documents. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I picked up my phone and called him. Coleman. It's Ariana. I recognize your number. I may have a problem. That sentence is why attorneys exist. I told him about Nathan's visit. Richard didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, Do you want me to stop preparing the transfer? I looked at the envelope. I don't know. Then we stop. I didn't say cancel it. You don't have to. Nothing moves until you're certain. I walked toward the window. Richard, am I being cruel? No. What if Madison is just scared about money? Then she can be scared about money without counting yours. That answer was so simple it hurt. I looked down at the envelope again. Then something changed inside me. Not revenge, not anger, clarity. I'm still giving them the envelope. Richard paused. You are, yes. And the note, I'm leaving it exactly as it is. Why I thought about Thomas. If you want to know what people value, don't watch them when they think you're useful. Watch them when they think you have nothing they want. Because I want to see what happens. Richard was silent for several seconds. Then he said, Ariana, don't turn your son's wedding into a test. I'm not. And I meant it. I wasn't setting a trap. I wasn't planning to provoke anyone. I would simply hand them what appeared to be $200. No explanation, no hint about property, no mention of value. If Madison smiled, thanked me, and tucked the envelope away, she might discover the message privately. Nathan might recognize his father's tradition. Maybe all my doubts would prove unfair. I desperately wanted that. But if Madison looked at those 4 bills and saw only an amount too small to respect, I would learn something too. The wedding was 7 days away. The paperwork remained unsigned. The Hawthorne house was still mine. And for the first time I was grateful for that, because Madison believed she understood my financial worth. She believed she knew what Nathan would eventually inherit. She believed the future contained money that would rescue them from choices they were already making. But there was one thing she didn't know. The largest gift I had ever considered giving my son was already sitting inside my desk. And whether he ever received it would depend on what happened after that envelope left my hands. On the morning of Nathan's wedding, I woke at 4:17. I know the exact time because I stared at the red numbers on my bedside clock for nearly 10 minutes before accepting that I wasn't going back to sleep. The house was completely still. For a few seconds I forgot what day it was. Then I saw the navy blue dress hanging on the closet door. My son's wedding day. I should have felt nothing but happiness. Instead, the first person I thought about was Thomas. You should be here, I whispered. That was the hardest part about milestones after losing him. Grief returned without asking permission. A birthday, a graduation, a wedding. You could be doing perfectly well for months, and then suddenly there was an empty chair where someone should have been. I got out of bed and walked downstairs. Thomas's photograph stood on the mantel. I picked it up. It was one of my favorites. He was 63 in the picture, standing beside his old pickup with one hand in his pocket and a ridiculous baseball cap Nathan had given him for Father's Day. Your boy is getting married today, I said. The house offered no answer. I smiled anyway. And apparently we're giving him a house. I could almost hear Thomas. Apparently I carried the photograph into the kitchen and set it on the table while I made coffee. Then I went into my study. The cream-colored envelope was still inside the top drawer. Nathan and Madison. With all my love, Mom. I opened it. 4 $50 bills. I checked the message one final time. For the house on Hawthorne. Ask Mr. Coleman before you spend this. Love, Mom. My handwriting looked almost ridiculously small. I ran my finger near the words without touching the ink. For the house on Hawthorne. Even after everything Nathan had told me about their debt and Madison's assumptions, part of me still wanted to give them that house. That surprised me. I had expected anger to make the decision easy. It hadn't. Love complicates consequences. Nathan was still my son. I could remember holding him when he had a fever at 6 years old, as clearly as I could remember him defending Madison when she embarrassed me. Both versions of him existed inside me. The little boy, the grown man, the son Thomas had been proud of, the man I was becoming afraid I no longer understood. I put the bills back inside the envelope. Nothing had been transferred. Nothing had been promised. Richard had made that very clear. The envelope represented an intention, not an obligation. I slipped it into my purse. By 9, my hair was done. By 10, I was dressed. I wore the navy blue dress, not the silver one, not anything chosen to make me look more acceptable beside Patricia Reynolds. My dress. I added the pearl earrings Thomas had given me on our 20th anniversary. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly who I was. A 68-year-old widow, a mother, a retired bookkeeper, a woman who had spent decades building a life rather than displaying one. And for the first time in weeks, I felt comfortable. The wedding was being held at Ashford Manor, a restored 19th-century estate about 40 minutes outside Richmond. When I arrived, the grounds looked like something from a magazine. White chairs lined the lawn. Tall arrangements of ivory roses framed the aisle. A string quartet played beneath enormous oak trees. Staff members moved everywhere carrying trays, flowers, boxes, glasses. I couldn't look at any of it without mentally calculating the cost. Thomas would have suffered. I could almost hear him asking how many roofs he could replace for the price of the flowers. Ariana. I turned. Patricia Reynolds was walking toward me. She wore a pale champagne-colored dress that looked custom-made. Her eyes moved briefly over my navy dress. There was a pause. Then she smiled. You look lovely. Thank you. The navy worked out. Worked out. I smiled. It usually does. She didn't understand the joke. That was fine. Nathan was upstairs with his groomsmen. I found him about 30 minutes before the ceremony. When I entered the room, he was standing in front of a mirror struggling with his tie. For one instant, I saw him at 17 before his senior prom. Hold still, I said. He turned. Mom. His face changed when he saw me. Not disappointment, not embarrassment, something softer. You look beautiful. Those 4 words nearly undid me. So do you. He laughed. Beautiful, your father would have said handsome. He's not here, so you're getting beautiful. Nathan looked down. The room became quiet. I wish he was here. I know. I stepped closer and straightened his tie. He would be very proud of you today. The words came automatically. Then I wondered whether they were true. Thomas would have loved seeing his son get married, but he would have had things to say about the debt, and even more to say about how Nathan had allowed Madison to treat me. Still, today was not the day to speak for the dead. Nathan looked at my face. Mom. Yes. Are we okay? The question surprised me. We're always going to be mother and son. That isn't what I asked. I met his eyes. No, we're not completely okay. His jaw tightened. I figured. But today isn't the day to fix it. He nodded. After the wedding. He hugged me. For several seconds, I let myself forget everything else. Then one of the groomsmen entered, and the moment ended. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I cried before Madison even appeared. When Nathan stood at the front beneath an arch covered in white flowers, I remembered him at 5 years old wearing Thomas's work boots and insisting he was going to build houses when he grew up. Then the music changed. Everyone stood. Madison walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She looked radiant. There is no other word for it. And when Nathan saw her, his entire face changed. That mattered. Whatever else was true, he loved her. I held on to that. Maybe love could teach them what money hadn't. Maybe marriage would make Madison feel secure enough to stop measuring herself against everyone else. Maybe Nathan would find his backbone again once the pressure of the wedding disappeared. Hope can survive a surprising amount of evidence. When they exchanged vows, I cried. When Nathan promised to honor Madison, something inside me tightened. Honor. Such a simple word, such a difficult thing to practice. After the ceremony, photographs began. There were dozens. The couple, the bridal party, the Reynolds family, the Brooks family, then both families together. At one point, the photographer positioned me beside Madison. Closer, he said. Madison put her arm lightly around my back. I did the same. For the camera, we looked like two women who had never hurt each other. I wondered how many family photographs worked that way. The reception began just after 6. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and candlelight. Nearly 200 guests filled the room. I recognized some of Nathan's co-workers and several people from Madison's real estate world. Patricia seemed to know everyone. I was introduced to developers, attorneys, investors, physicians. Not one asked whether I had been a bookkeeper, and if they had, I would have told them, proudly. Dinner passed. Speeches began. Nathan's best man keeper, and if they had, I would have told them, proudly. Dinner passed. Speeches began. Nathan's best man told embarrassing stories. Patricia spoke about Madison's ambition. Then Nathan raised his glass. I wish my dad could be here. The room quieted. He looked toward me. He taught me that building something that lasts takes patience. Mom taught me how to keep it standing. My throat closed. For a moment, the last several months disappeared. I saw my boy again. I raised my glass. To you both. Maybe I thought. Maybe everything would be all right. Later, when guests began moving between tables and the dance floor, I reached into my purse. The envelope felt almost weightless. That was the irony. A gift potentially worth $750,000 weighed less than an ounce. I found Nathan and Madison near the cake table. Nathan saw the envelope first. Mom, you didn't have to get us anything. I know. I handed it to him. This is from me. And in a way from your father, too. Nathan's expression changed. What do you mean you'll understand? Before he could say more, someone called his name from across the room. Madison took the envelope. Thank you, Ariana. Her voice was polite. Then she glanced down at it. I saw the smallest change in her expression. The envelope was thin, very thin. No box, no checkbook, no obvious sign of the substantial gift she may have expected. Nathan leaned toward her. We'll open everything tomorrow. Madison smiled. Of course. But a few minutes later, I saw her walking toward a group near the bar. Patricia was there, 2 bridesmaids, several guests I didn't recognize. The envelope was still in Madison's hand. I knew immediately what she was going to do. Part of me wanted to stop her, not because I feared the message, because I suddenly wanted to protect her from herself. I took one step forward, then stopped. Madison slid her finger beneath the flap. Nathan was across the room talking to his best man. Patricia leaned closer. Madison opened the envelope. She pulled out the $450 bills. I watched her eyes move over them. Once, twice. Her eyebrows lifted. One bridesmaid said something I couldn't hear. Madison answered. Then she laughed. Not yet loudly, but loudly enough. I stood 15 feet away. She had not noticed the writing. Not yet. All she saw was the number, $200. Her mouth curved into a smile. Patricia looked over her shoulder and saw me. For one brief second, our eyes met. Then Madison lifted the 4 bills in her hand. And I knew that whatever happened next, I would never again have to wonder how she felt about the woman she believed had given her almost nothing. There are moments in life that seem to slow down while they are happening. Madison standing beside the bar with those four $50 bills in her hand was one of them. I could see everything. The champagne glass beside her elbow, Patricia standing to her right, two bridesmaids leaning closer. A man I recognized as one of Madison's real estate clients laughing at something someone had said moments earlier. And Madison still holding the money I had given her. My money, my message, my intention to give her and my son a mortgage-free home. She looked at the bills again. Then she laughed. $200. Her voice was louder this time. One of the bridesmaids gave an awkward smile. Madison fanned the bills between her fingers. I think the valet got more than this tonight. Someone laughed. Then another person did. Not because the joke was particularly funny, I think. People laugh when they don't know what else to do, especially at weddings. Especially when the bride is the one making the joke. I stood still. For one strange second I wasn't angry. I was embarrassed for her. I thought about all the ways she could have responded. She could have put the money back into the envelope. She could have said thank you. She could have opened it later. She could even have been privately disappointed. People are allowed private disappointment. What mattered was what they chose to do with it. Madison had chosen an audience. Patricia took one of the bills from her daughter's hand. She looked at it. Then she looked toward me. "Oh, Madison," she said. There was laughter in her voice. "People give what they can afford." That was when the embarrassment stopped being hers. It landed on me. I felt heat move up my neck. Patricia's words were softer than Madison's joke, but somehow they cut deeper, because they were dressed as kindness. Poor Ariana. She gave what she could. How sweet. I looked at the woman standing beside my son's new wife, and wondered what she would have said if she knew that the woman she was pitying had turned down $740,000 for a property neither she nor her daughter knew existed. Then I hated myself for thinking that, because that was exactly the trap. If I needed my assets to prove my dignity, then I was measuring myself by the same scale Madison used. I didn't need Hawthorne Avenue to make me worthy of respect. I had been worthy before Thomas bought it. I had been worthy when I was balancing payroll at midnight. I had been worthy when Nathan was a baby, and Thomas and I were counting grocery money at the kitchen table. I had been worthy every day of my life, when no one knew what I owned. Money could expose their judgment. It did not need to defend me from it. Then Nathan appeared. He had heard the laughter. I watched him approach the group, smiling at first because he didn't understand what was happening. What did I miss? Madison turned toward him and held up the bills. "Your mother's wedding gift." His smile faded. He looked at the money, then at the envelope, then at me. Our eyes met across the room. I saw recognition in his face. Not recognition of the message. He was too far away to see it. Recognition of the situation. He knew. He knew Madison had done something cruel. And I waited. That may have been the longest 5 seconds of my life. I waited for my son to say, "Put that away." I waited for him to say, "Madison, apologize." I waited for him to walk across the room and stand beside me. I would have accepted almost anything. Instead, Nathan touched Madison lightly on the arm. "Come on, Maddie." That was all. 2 words. Soft, private, almost apologetic. Madison looked at him. "What?" "Just put it away." She laughed again. "I was joking." "I know." There it was. "I know. Not that wasn't funny. Not you embarrassed my mother. Not don't speak about her that way." "I know." He was managing Madison's mood, protecting the evening, avoiding a scene. And in doing so, he had made a choice. He just didn't understand yet that I had seen it. One of the bridesmaids noticed me standing nearby. Her smile vanished. She whispered something to Madison. Madison turned. Our eyes met. For half a second I saw alarm. Then she recovered. "Ariana." The group went quiet. I walked toward them. Every step felt strangely calm. The music continued behind us. People were dancing. Glasses clinked. Someone near the other side of the ballroom cheered. The wedding kept happening even though something inside me had just broken. Madison lowered the money. "I hope you didn't hear that." It was possibly the worst thing she could have said. Not, "I'm sorry." I hope you didn't hear it. meaning the cruelty was acceptable as long as the person being mocked remained unaware. I heard you, I said. Her cheeks reddened. I was only kidding. I know. Nathan looked at me. Mom. I turned toward him. He stopped. I could see fear in his eyes now. He knew me well enough to understand that my calm voice was not a good sign. Patricia stepped in. Ariana, please don't take this personally. Everyone's emotional today. I looked at her. How else would you suggest I take a joke about a gift I personally gave? Her smile disappeared. Madison spoke quickly. I really didn't mean anything by it. I looked at the 4 bills in her hand. She still hadn't seen the message. That amazed me. The words were there, just inches from her fingers. For the house on Hawthorne. She had looked at the amount, but not at the gift. That seemed almost poetic. Nathan moved closer. Mom, can we talk somewhere private? Now he wanted privacy. I nearly smiled. No. His face fell. No, this is your wedding. Go enjoy it. Mom. I looked at Madison, then at the bills. I hope you spend it wisely. She blinked. The words meant nothing to her. Not yet. I turned away. Nathan followed me. Mom. I kept walking. He caught up near the hallway outside the ballroom. Please stop. I stopped. The music became muffled behind the closed doors. Nathan stood in front of me. I'm sorry. I looked at him. For what? His mouth opened. Nothing came out. That told me everything. If he didn't know exactly what he was apologizing for, then the apology was simply an attempt to make the discomfort disappear. For what Madison said. And his eyes shifted. And Mom, she's had champagne. She's exhausted. She's been under pressure for months. I stared at him. Even now. Even here. He was explaining her to me. Nathan, do you know what hurt me? I know what she said was wrong. No. Do you know what hurt me? He looked confused. I touched his cheek. For a second, I remembered the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. You stood there. His face changed. Mom, you stood there and tried to make the moment smaller so you wouldn't have to make a choice. That's not fair. Isn't it? It was our wedding reception. What did you want me to do? Start an argument in front of everybody. I wanted you to know without asking what was right. He looked down. I felt tears rising and refused to let them fall. Not there. Not in that hallway. You know what your father would have done. His head came up. Don't. I wasn't going to compare you to him. That's exactly what you're doing. No. I shook my head. I was going to tell you that your father made mistakes too. Plenty of them. But when someone he loved was being humiliated, he never needed time to calculate who might become uncomfortable if he defended them. Nathan's eyes filled. I hated seeing that. Even angry, I was still his mother. Some instincts don't disappear simply because you're disappointed. He whispered, I'm sorry. This time it sounded different. I nodded. I know. Don't leave. I glanced toward the ballroom. I think I should. People will notice. There it was again. Appearances. I almost laughed. Then tell them I'm tired. Mom, please. I touched his arm. Go back to your wife. He didn't move. Go. Finally, he stepped aside. I walked toward the coat room. I didn't cry until I reached my car. Then I sat behind the steering wheel and let everything come. Not because Madison had mocked $200. The money meant nothing. I cried because I missed Thomas. Because Nathan had looked at me and chosen silence. Because for months I had been telling myself that all the little humiliations were misunderstandings. They weren't. And because inside my purse was a copy of the note I had written before placing that bill in the envelope. A promise I no longer knew if I wanted to keep. I drove home alone. The roads were quiet. When I entered my house, the first thing I saw was Thomas's photograph on the mantel. I took off my shoes, sat on the sofa, and looked at him. Well, I whispered, I think we got our answer. The house was silent. My phone buzzed. Nathan. I didn't answer. A minute later, another message appeared. Mom, please call me. Then another. I'm sorry. I turned the phone face down. Monday morning, I decided I would call Richard. The transfer would not happen. At least not now. Perhaps not ever. Back at the reception, however, Madison still had the four $50 bills. And sometime after I left, she apparently decided the whole thing was funny enough to continue. She told one of the bridesmaids she might give the money to the bartender as an extra tip. That joke was the reason she finally unfolded one of the bills completely. The reason her eyes moved toward the narrow white margin. The reason she saw my handwriting. And the reason less than an hour after I drove away, humiliated my son's new wife suddenly stopped laughing. I learned what happened after I left the reception from Nathan. Not that night. That night I turned off my phone, removed my navy dress, washed my face, and sat in my kitchen wearing Thomas's old bathrobe because it still smelled faintly of cedar, no matter how many times it had been washed. For once, I didn't want explanations. I didn't want apologies. I wanted silence. But back at Ashford Manor, Madison was still holding the four $50 bills. According to Nathan, she had been embarrassed after realizing I heard her joke, but not embarrassed enough to understand why it mattered. She returned to the reception. She danced. She drank champagne. She smiled for photographs. And at some point, one of her bridesmaids apparently said, "You really should put your mother-in-law's money somewhere safe." Madison laughed. Safe from what inflation? That was when she made the second joke. She said she might as well give the entire $200 to the bartender as a tip. Nathan heard her. "Enough, Madison." She looked at him. "What put the money away?" "Oh my God, Nathan. I was joking." "So was I supposed to laugh when you embarrassed my mother?" Madison's smile faded. That was the first time all evening he had said it plainly. "Embarrassed my mother." Patricia immediately intervened. "Not tonight." Nathan turned toward her. "What does that mean?" "It means this is your wedding night. Whatever misunderstanding happened can be dealt with tomorrow." There wasn't a misunderstanding. Madison looked around nervously. Several guests were close enough to hear them. "Nathan, lower your voice." And there it was. The same thing he had done to me. "Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass anyone. Keep everything pleasant." Except now he was beginning to understand what that silence cost. He reached for the envelope. "Give it to me." Madison pulled it back. "Why? Because it was from my mother. It was addressed to both of us." "Then stop treating it like a joke." One of the bridesmaids stepped away. Patricia suddenly became interested in someone across the room. Madison looked down at the bills. One had folded slightly in her hand. She smoothed it against the bar. That was when she saw the writing. At first she thought it was some kind of mark. Then she leaned closer. Nathan told me her entire expression changed before she had even finished reading what he asked. Madison didn't answer. She read it again. Then she handed him the bill. Nathan recognized my handwriting immediately. "For the house on Hawthorne. Ask Mr. Coleman before you spend this. Love, Mom." He read it twice, then a third time. According to him, the noise of the reception seemed to disappear. Madison was the first to speak. "What house?" Nathan looked at her. "I don't know." "What does she mean, the house on Hawthorne?" I said, "I don't know." Madison took the bill back. "Is this your dad's handwriting, number Mom's? But why write on money?" That question was when Nathan understood. Not the house, the tradition. He remembered the bills Thomas had written on when he was a boy. The $5 bill for cleaning the garage. The graduation money. The $100 Thomas gave him when he moved into his first apartment. Nathan later told me that memory made him feel physically sick. Because suddenly the four $50 bills were not cheap. They were personal. I had taken something Thomas used to do for his son and carried it into Nathan's wedding without his father being there. And Madison had held it up for strangers to laugh at. Nathan sat down. Madison stared at him. "What is it? My dad used to do this. Do what? Write messages on money." She went quiet. Nathan rubbed his thumb over my handwriting. "Mom wasn't giving us $200. Madison looked toward the ballroom doors. By then, I had been gone nearly 40 minutes. "What house?" she asked again. Nathan shook his head. "I genuinely don't know. But Madison did know something. Hawthorne Avenue. She had talked about it over dinner. She knew the redevelopment rumors. She knew investors had been buying parcels. And she knew enough about real estate to understand that if I owned property, There, the words on that bill could mean something substantial. Nathan saw the realization happen. "Don't," he said. Madison looked at him. "Don't what? Start calculating. I'm not." "Yes, you are." "Nathan, I'm trying to understand what your mother wrote." "No, you're trying to understand what it's worth." She stared at him. "That's not fair." Those were the exact words Nathan had said to me earlier. Sometimes life has a cruel sense of symmetry. Madison pulled out her phone. Nathan put his hand over it. "Seriously, what, you humiliated her over money, and now that you think there might be more money, you're going to search property records? I work in real estate." "That's not an answer." She lowered her voice. "If Ariana owns something on Hawthorne, we need to know what she meant." "Why?" "Because she told us to ask Mr. Coleman. Tomorrow. Nathan, tomorrow." I took the bills and placed them back inside the envelope. For the first time that night, Madison didn't argue. But the celebration had changed. Nathan told me later that he couldn't enjoy the rest of it. Every time someone congratulated him, he thought about me walking out. Every time he saw Madison laughing with a guest, he heard her saying valet. And every time he touched the envelope in his jacket pocket, he remembered Thomas. By midnight, most guests had left. Instead of enjoying the hotel suite they had booked, Nathan and Madison sat across from each other arguing. The wedding dress was still on. His tie was gone. The cream-colored envelope lay between them on a table. Madison finally asked, "Did you know? No. You swear yes. Your mother never mentioned owning another house? No. Your father never did. He owned different things over the years. I didn't keep an inventory." Madison looked frustrated. "How do you not know what your parents own?" Nathan stared at her. "Because it wasn't mine." That sentence stopped her. It was the first sign that something from our kitchen conversation had stayed with him. Madison looked away. After a moment, she said, "I shouldn't have made that joke." "No, I was surprised." "Being surprised doesn't make you cruel." "I wasn't trying to be cruel. You held my mother's gift up in front of people and laughed at it." "I said I was sorry." "You told her you hoped she didn't hear you." Madison's face tightened. "What do you want me to say?" Nathan looked at her for a long time. "I don't know." Then he asked the question that changed their first night as husband and wife. "If there wasn't anything written on that money, would you still feel this bad?" Madison didn't answer. The silence told him enough. The next morning, I woke shortly after 7. My phone was full of messages. Nathan had called 6 times, Madison twice. There were 3 texts from Nathan. "Mom, please call me. I found the message. I need to explain." The last text had arrived at 1:14 a.m. "I am so sorry." Madison had sent only one. "Ariana, I owe you an apology. Please let me speak to you." I read it. Then I put the phone down. I wasn't ready. At 8:30, Nathan called again. This time I answered. "Mom." His voice sounded exhausted. "Good morning. You left." "Yes. I tried calling." "I know." There was a pause. Then he said, "We found the message." I closed my eyes. Of course they had. What house? Not hello, not I'm sorry. What house? My disappointment must have traveled through the silence because Nathan immediately corrected himself. "No. Sorry. That came out wrong." "Yes, it did." "Mom, I don't care about the house." "Then don't ask about it." Another silence. I remember Dad writing on money. That softened something in me despite myself. "I thought you might." "I still have some of them." "I know." He sounded surprised. "How you left a box in your old bedroom." He exhaled. "Mom, why did you do it that way?" "Because your father should have been part of your wedding gift." His voice broke slightly. That hurt me. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. Was Hawthorne supposed to be ours? There it was again. This time, however, I heard something different in the question. Not greed. Fear. Fear of what he had lost. Or perhaps fear of what his behavior had revealed. It was something I was considering. Considering, yes. But the note says for the house. The paperwork was never completed. Nathan became very quiet. Because of Madison, no. That was important. The transfer was always supposed to happen after the wedding and after the tenant moved, so it isn't ours. No. I heard him swallow. Is it worth a lot? I almost smiled. Ask yourself why you need to know. I don't. Then don't. He accepted that. A few seconds later, Madison's voice appeared faintly in the background. Nathan said something I couldn't hear. Then he returned. Madison wants to talk to you. Not today. Okay. That surprised me. No pressure. No defense. Just okay. I need some time, Nathan. I understand. And I have an appointment tomorrow morning with Mr. Coleman. He knew. Yes. Nathan was silent for a long moment. Then he said something I hadn't expected. Mom, whatever you decide about the house, don't decide it because you feel guilty about me. I sat down. For the first time since the reception, I heard my son, instead of Madison's husband. Thank you, I said. After we hung up, I made coffee. Across town, however, Madison wasn't willing to wait. By 10 o'clock, the real estate agent in her had taken over. She searched public property records. It wasn't difficult. And when she typed my name into the county database, Hawthorne Avenue appeared. Owner Ariana Brooks, purchase history, parcel information, tax assessment. Then she searched recent sales around the block, developer acquisitions, zoning applications, planning documents. By the time she finished, she understood something Nathan still didn't. That little aging house was sitting in the middle of an area developers desperately wanted. And the property I had considered giving them was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly more. Madison called Nathan into the room. He looked at her laptop, then at her. She pointed to the screen. Your mother owns it. Nathan didn't respond. Madison scrolled. Do you understand where this is? Yes. No, Nathan. Look at the surrounding parcels. I don't care. She could be sitting on $750,000. Nathan stared at her. And for the first time since they had said their vows, he saw the question clearly. Not what had my mother intended to give them, not whether I would forgive them. Something much more uncomfortable. Why had Madison's remorse become so urgent only after she discovered what I owned? And the next morning when they walked into Richard Coleman's office hoping for answers, my attorney was going to make one thing painfully clear. A message written on a $50 bill was not a deed, and the house on Hawthorne Avenue still belonged entirely to me. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, I was sitting in Richard Coleman's office. I arrived before Nathan and Madison. That was intentional. Richard had called me Sunday afternoon after receiving 2 messages from Nathan. He hadn't returned either one. I assumed you might want to speak first, he told me. You assumed correctly. He closed the door. The Hawthorne file was already on his desk. Seeing it there made everything suddenly feel more serious. At the wedding, the house had been an idea hidden behind 4 $50 bills. Now it was paperwork, ownership, consequences. Richard sat across from me. How bad was it, I told him. Not every detail, just enough. Madison opening the envelope publicly. The joke about the valet. Patricia's comment. Nathan's silence. My leaving. Richard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he removed his glasses. I'm sorry, thank you. Do you want the transfer documents destroyed? I looked at the file. No. His eyebrows rose. No, not yet. Ariana, I said I'm not giving them the house. That sounds fairly definitive. It is. Then why keep the documents? Because I don't want to make every decision while I'm hurt. Richard studied me, then nodded. Fair. I appreciated that he didn't push. I had already decided Hawthorne would not become Nathan and Madison's wedding gift, but deciding what not to do was easier than deciding what came next. Richard tapped the file. The property is still completely yours. No deed was signed. No transfer was recorded. No enforceable gift was created. I know. I'm saying it again because I suspect someone else may need to hear it. Right on cue, his receptionist called. Mr. Brooks and Mrs. Brooks are here. Richard looked at me. Together. Yes. I hadn't expected that. Nathan knew I wanted time. Madison apparently had different ideas. Do you want them in here? I considered saying no. Then I thought about all the assumptions that had brought us to this point. No, I said. Not yet. Richard nodded. Give me 10 minutes. I walked through a side door into a smaller conference room. From there, I couldn't see the reception area, but I could hear muffled voices when Richard opened his office door. Nathan spoke first. Mr. Coleman, good morning. Madison's voice followed. Thank you for seeing us without an appointment. I wouldn't say I'm seeing you yet. Even through the wall, I almost smiled. Richard had a gift for making sentences sound polite and hostile at the same time. A few minutes later, their voices moved into his office. The door closed. Richard had asked whether I wanted to listen. I had hesitated, then agreed. Not because I wanted to spy on my son, because I wanted to know what they asked when they didn't know I was nearby. Madison began. We found a message Ariana wrote on one of the bills she gave us. I understand. It told us to ask you about a house on Hawthorne Avenue. Yes. A pause. We looked up the property. Of course she led with that. Nathan interrupted. Madison. What he knows we did. Richard's voice remained neutral. What exactly are you asking me? Madison answered. Was Ariana planning to give us that house? Richard didn't hesitate. I cannot discuss Ariana's legal affairs without her permission, but the note specifically told us to ask you. It did. So she authorized you to tell us something. She authorized me to speak with you if she confirmed that she wished to proceed. Silence. Nathan spoke quietly. Has she no? Another silence. Then Madison asked the question I knew was coming. Were documents already prepared? Richard paused. I can tell you this much. Ariana Brooks is currently the sole legal owner of the Hawthorne property. Madison spoke quickly. But were transfer documents prepared? Prepared documents are not transferred property. That isn't what I asked. No, Richard said calmly. But it's the answer you need. I sat back in my chair. For months, Madison had been accustomed to controlling conversations. Richard was not Nathan. He wasn't going to soften reality to keep her comfortable. Nathan spoke. Mr. Coleman, I don't want anything Mom doesn't want to give me. My throat tightened. Madison turned on him. We're just trying to understand what happened. I know what happened. What my wife humiliated my mother at our wedding. The room went silent. I hadn't expected him to say it that plainly. Madison's voice became colder. I already apologized to you. You don't owe me the apology. I know. Then why are we here? Because your mother told us to ask him before you laughed at her. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Before. That was the part Madison seemed unable to understand. My note had been written before the wedding, before the joke, before Nathan's silence, before I discovered what they would do with a gift they believed was beneath them. Richard interrupted. Perhaps both of you should speak with Ariana. Madison sighed. She won't talk to me. She said not today, Nathan corrected. Exactly. No, not exactly. The tension between them was unmistakable. Their marriage was less than 48 hours old, and already money had found every weak place. Madison lowered her voice. Nathan, we have almost $40,000 in debt. I closed my eyes. There it was. The house wasn't simply a gift anymore. It was a solution. Nathan answered. That debt existed before we knew anything about Hawthorne. I know. Then we solve it the same way we were going to solve it before. How we cut expenses. We already discussed this. No, I discussed it. You told me not to worry. I thought we had options. What options? Madison didn't answer. Nathan did. My mother's money. The words hung there. Even Richard remained silent. Finally, Madison said, That's unfair. Is it? You're acting like I married you for an inheritance? I didn't say that. You're implying it. Then answer me something. I leaned forward. Nathan's voice changed. It became quieter, more controlled. If there had been nothing written on that $50 bill, would we be sitting in a lawyer's office right now? Madison didn't answer. Nathan continued. Would you have searched my mother's property records? Still nothing. Would you be this desperate to apologize? Of course I would. Then why didn't you apologize before you found the note? I was embarrassed. You were embarrassed because she heard you. That isn't fair. You keep saying that. Madison's chair moved sharply. I made a mistake, Nathan. Yes, a stupid joke. Yes, I can't undo it. No. So what exactly do you want from me? Nathan answered immediately. I want to know whether you're sorry you hurt my mother or sorry you might have lost a house. The silence afterward was so complete I could hear the air conditioning vent above me. I closed my eyes. That was the question I had been afraid to ask. Not because I feared Madison's answer, because I feared Nathan would never ask it. Eventually, Madison spoke. I don't know. 3 words. Quiet. Almost broken. And for the first time since I met her, I believed her completely. She didn't know. Richard spoke gently. That may be the most useful thing anyone has said this morning. Madison didn't respond. A minute later, I heard chairs move. Nathan said, I'm leaving. Nathan. I need air. The office door opened, then closed. Madison remained. Richard asked, Are you all right? No. There was no polish in her voice now. No confidence. No real estate charm. I made one joke. Richard didn't answer. One joke, she repeated. And suddenly everyone thinks I'm some horrible person. Richard's voice remained calm. I don't think Ariana is judging you based on one joke. What does that mean? I think the joke confirmed concerns she already had. Madison became quiet. Then she asked, Did she tell you that I won't discuss private conversations? Another pause. What is the house worth? I felt something inside me sink. Even now. Even after Nathan's question. Richard didn't answer. Madison tried again. I can estimate it myself. Then why ask no response? Richard continued. If you want some unsolicited advice, Mrs. Brooks, stop asking what the property is worth. Why? Because every time you do, you make your husband's question more difficult to answer in your favor. I almost laughed. Madison didn't. Several minutes later, she left. Richard came into the conference room. While I stared at the table, I don't know whether to feel better or worse. That seems appropriate. At least she said she didn't know. Yes. That was honest. Yes. I stood and walked toward the window. Below us, people moved along the sidewalk carrying coffee briefcases, shopping bags. Ordinary Monday morning. My family felt like it had cracked open and Richmond hadn't noticed. Richard joined me. What do you want to do? I know what I'm not doing. Hawthorne. They're not getting it. He nodded. And the property I don't know yet. That can wait. I looked at him. Can it? Ariana, you've owned that house for 18 years. It can survive another week without a grand purpose. I smiled. Then my phone vibrated. Nathan. I answered. Mom. Yes. I know you're there. I looked at Richard. He shrugged. Apparently my son had inherited more of Thomas's instincts than I realized. I'm downstairs, Nathan said. Okay. Can I see you? I hesitated. Then said, Come back up. 10 minutes later, Nathan entered Richard's conference room alone. His eyes were red. He sat across from me. For once, he didn't ask about Hawthorne. He didn't ask about the transfer. He didn't ask what I had decided. He simply said, I failed you. My heart tightened. Nathan. No. Let me say it. So I did. I kept telling myself I was keeping peace. I wasn't. I was asking you to absorb disrespect so I wouldn't have to deal with it. I looked at my son. He was finally saying the thing I had needed him to understand. I don't want the house, he said. You don't have to say that. I mean it. His voice broke. I don't want anything Dad worked for to become the reason I lose the kind of man he raised. That was when I reached across the table and took his hand. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Not because the house was his again. It wasn't. But because for the first time in a long while Nathan wasn't asking me to understand Madison. He was trying to understand himself. And I knew our next conversation couldn't happen in Richard's office. It needed to happen at my kitchen table. The same table where Thomas had once taught our son that money should give him choices, not become the reason he made them. There I would finally tell Nathan the whole truth about Hawthorne Avenue, what Thomas and I had intended, what I had planned for his wedding, and why the most painful thing I lost that night had never been a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was my trust in my own son. Nathan came to my house the following evening alone. I knew he was alone because I watched from the kitchen window as his truck pulled into the driveway. For a few seconds he remained behind the wheel. He didn't move. He just sat there with both hands resting on the steering wheel. I had seen Thomas do that many times, usually after a difficult day at work. He would sit in the driveway for a minute before coming inside because he didn't want whatever happened at the job site to walk through the front door with him. Watching Nathan do the same thing hurt. Eventually he climbed out. I opened the door before he knocked. "Hi, Mom." "Hi." There was no hug. Not because I didn't love him, because some distances shouldn't be covered before the conversation that created them has been faced. "Coffee." He almost smiled. "It's 7 at night. You've never respected the clock before. Coffee's fine." That tiny exchange helped. I poured 2 cups. Nathan sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had confessed the wedding debt. The same table where Thomas had once helped him with homework, taught him to balance a checkbook, and lectured him about buying his first used car. I sat across from him. For a while neither of us spoke. Finally Nathan said, "Madison knows I came." I nodded. She wanted to come too. "But you told her no." I told her. I needed to talk to my mother without making her part of the conversation. That mattered, more than I let him see. "How is she?" Nathan stared into his coffee. Embarrassed. Angry. Confused. At me. Me at herself, mostly. Mostly. He gave me a tired smile. I'm trying not to translate for her anymore. I almost smiled back. That would be a healthy habit. He nodded. Then the smile disappeared. "Mom, I need to say something before we talk about Hawthorne." "All right. I am sorry." I waited. Nathan continued. "Not because of the house. Not because of what Madison found on the money. I'm sorry because when she made that joke I knew it was wrong." His eyes lifted to mine. I knew immediately. That was difficult to hear. I would almost have preferred him to say he hadn't understood. "Then why didn't you say something?" He looked down. "Because I was afraid." "Of what?" "The wedding turning into a disaster." I said nothing. Madison had been stressed for months. Her mother was watching everything. There were clients there, people from work. I knew if I confronted her publicly she would be humiliated. I felt the old hurt return. "So you protected her from humiliation?" "Yes. And let me have it instead." His eyes closed. "Yes." The honesty of that answer hurt more than an excuse would have. Nathan rubbed his hands together. "I told myself I was keeping the peace. You weren't. I know. You were choosing who had to pay for it." He looked at me. I could see tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry." This time I believed him. But believing an apology and being healed by it are not the same thing. "Nathan, do you know why that moment hurt so much? Because I'm your son. Yes. But more than that." I stood and walked toward the counter. On the wall near the refrigerator was an old photograph. Thomas and Nathan at a Little League game. Nathan couldn't have been more than 9. Thomas had one hand on his shoulder. I took the photograph down and brought it to the table. "Your father and I spent years trying to teach you that dignity isn't connected to money." Nathan stared at the picture. "I remember. Do you?" He flinched. I hated asking it. But I needed the truth more than I needed comfort. "You started changing after you met Madison." His jaw tightened slightly. "Mom, I'm not blaming your wife for everything. Good, you allowed it." That stopped him. "You started caring about things you never cared about before. Restaurants, cars, who was invited where, whether people thought your house was impressive. I wanted her to be happy. And when did her happiness become your responsibility to purchase?" Nathan looked away. I continued more gently. "Love doesn't require you to become somebody else." He swallowed. "I didn't realize I was." "I did." Silence. Then he said Dad would have been disappointed. There was something almost childlike in his voice. I reached across the table. "Your father was disappointed in you plenty of times." Nathan looked up surprised. I smiled. "You think he enjoyed the year you were 16? That brought a weak laugh. "He threatened to sell me. He couldn't find a buyer." Nathan laughed again. For a few seconds, the heaviness lifted. Then I squeezed his hand. Disappointment isn't the end of love. His eyes filled again. Then why does it feel like I lost something because you did? He became still. My trust. The words landed between us. Nathan nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? Yes. He wiped his face. And I know I can't ask you to give it back just because I apologized. That was the moment I decided to tell him everything. Not because he had earned Hawthorne, he hadn't. Because he had finally stopped asking what he was getting. I stood. Come with me. We walked into my study. I opened the filing cabinet and removed a folder. Inside were photographs of the Hawthorne house from 18 years earlier. Nathan picked one up. The porch was half demolished. Thomas stood beside a pile of lumber, grinning. Dad. He loved that place. I barely remember it. You came by once while we were renovating. You complained there was nowhere to sit. Nathan smiled. That sounds like me. I showed him another photograph. Thomas painting the front door. Another of me standing in the kitchen holding a roller. Then I told him everything. How Thomas found the property. How we bought it cheaply. How we repaired it ourselves. How Helen Parker became our tenant. How we kept her rent low after she lost her husband. How the neighborhood changed. How developers started calling. Nathan listened without interrupting. Then I told him about the offers. 600,000, he asked. More. His eyebrows rose. The latest was 740,000. Nathan stared at me. I expected shock. I expected questions. Instead, he put the photograph down. And you were going to give that to us, yes. He stood and walked toward the window. Why, you're my son. That isn't enough of a reason. I smiled sadly. Richard said something similar. Nathan shook his head. Mom, that's almost $750,000. I can count. That's not funny. It was a little funny. He turned back. What exactly were you planning? I explained that Helen was moving to North Carolina after the wedding. I explained that Richard had prepared transfer documents, but nothing had been signed. The plan was to give you and Madison the property mortgage-free. Nathan covered his mouth with one hand. I continued. You could live there, sell it, hold it. I hadn't decided how much advice I was going to force on you. Probably a lot. Absolutely. He sat again. Then he looked at the photograph of Thomas. That's what the money meant. Yes, the message. Yes. He closed his eyes. Dad's tradition. Yes. That broke him. Nathan leaned forward and covered his face. For several seconds I let him cry. Then I sat beside him. I still have the bills he gave me, he whispered. I know. I thought you were just giving me something from Dad. I was. He looked at me. The house, too. The house was part of what he built. The message was the part of him I wanted you to recognize. Nathan shook his head, and Madison held it up and laughed. This isn't only about Madison. I know. She didn't make you stand there silently. I know. For the first time, he didn't defend her, didn't explain her childhood, didn't mention wedding stress. He simply accepted the truth. Then he asked, Are you still giving us the house? It was the question I had known would eventually come. I looked directly at him. No. Nathan nodded. No argument. No surprise. Just a slow nod. Okay. That response almost hurt more than anger would have. You understand, yes. I haven't decided what I'll do with it. You don't have to explain. It may eventually be sold. Mom. What it's yours. 3 simple words. The same truth I had tried to make him understand a week earlier. Now he was giving it back to me. I felt tears fill my eyes. Nathan saw them. I don't deserve that house. This isn't about deserving. Yes, it is. He took a breath. If you gave it to us now, every time I walked through that door, I'd remember what happened at the wedding. I hadn't considered that. He continued. And Madison would know that no matter how she treated you, everything still ended with her getting what she wanted. I stared at him. Nathan looked toward Thomas's photograph. Dad wouldn't have wanted that. No, I said softly. He wouldn't. We sat quietly. Then Nathan said something that surprised me. I think I need to fix my marriage. I looked at him. Not end it, no. There was certainty in his voice. I love Madison, but I think I've been loving her badly. What does that mean? I've been agreeing with her because I was afraid she'd be unhappy if I didn't. He looked at me. That's not love, is it? No. What is it? Fear wearing good manners. Nathan laughed softly. That sounds like Dad. It is. Thomas had said it once about a business partner who never disagreed with anyone important. Nathan smiled. Then his expression became serious. Madison wants to talk to you. I know. You don't have to. I know. She asked me what she should say. And what did you tell her? Nothing. I raised an eyebrow. Nathan smiled faintly. I told her if someone else has to write your apology, you probably aren't ready to give it. That sounded so much like Thomas that I had to look away. For the first time in months, I felt something other than disappointment when I looked at my son. Hope, small, fragile, but real. Nathan stood to leave about an hour later. At the door he hugged me. This time I hugged him back. I love you, Mom. I love you too. He pulled away. Even if I don't inherit anything, I gave him a look. Keep testing me, and you'll inherit my collection of expired coupons. He laughed. Then he became serious. Whatever you do with Hawthorne, don't make the decision because of me. I won't. And don't give it back to us because I apologized. I won't. He nodded. Good. I watched his truck disappear down the street. Then I returned to the study. On the desk was the photograph of Thomas standing on Hawthorne Avenue 18 years earlier. I picked it up. You'd be proud of him tonight, I whispered. Not because Nathan had apologized. Because he had finally understood that consequences weren't the opposite of love. Sometimes they were part of it. But Nathan wasn't the only person who needed to understand that. 2 days later, Madison would sit across from me in this same house, without Nathan, without Patricia, without an audience. And I would ask her one question. A question no property record, no attorney, and no amount of money could help her answer. Would you be sitting here if there had been nothing written on that $50 bill? Madison called me 2 days after Nathan came to the house. I almost didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her. I simply wasn't sure I was ready to hear another explanation. But when I saw her name on the screen, I thought about something Nathan had said. If someone else has to write your apology, you probably aren't ready to give it. I wondered whether Madison was finally ready to speak for herself. So I answered. Hello, Ariana. Her voice sounded different. No polished confidence. No cheerful tone carefully chosen for a client. Just uncertainty. Yes. Could I come see you? I looked toward the kitchen table. Is Nathan with you? No. Your mother number good. She paused. Is that a yes? Yes. She arrived 40 minutes later. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her. Not physically. She was still Madison. But the woman standing on my porch was nothing like the bride at Ashford Manor. No carefully styled hair. No expensive dress. No perfect makeup. She wore jeans, a plain sweater, and flats. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail. She looked tired. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked ordinary. Human. Come in. Thank you. She followed me into the kitchen. I offered coffee. She declined, then changed her mind. Yes, actually. I poured 2 cups. Madison wrapped both hands around hers but didn't drink. For several seconds we sat quietly. Finally she said, I rehearsed this in the car. I raised an eyebrow. That doesn't inspire confidence. To my surprise, she smiled. Only briefly. I know. Then the smile disappeared. I wanted to say everything correctly. Maybe don't. She looked at me. Don't what? Don't what? Say it correctly. I leaned back. Say it honestly. Madison looked down at her coffee. Then she took a breath. What I did at the wedding was cruel. I said nothing. I've been calling it a joke because that makes it sound smaller. Still, I waited. It wasn't funny. No, I embarrassed you. Yes, in front of people, yes. And when you walked over, instead of apologizing, I said, I hoped you hadn't heard me. I watched her carefully. She wasn't crying. Not yet. That was probably the worst part, she continued. Because it meant I knew what I'd said was wrong. I just didn't want consequences for saying it. That was honest. Painfully honest. I nodded. Go on. Madison swallowed. I am sorry. I believed she meant it. But there was still one question standing between us. So I asked it. If there had been nothing written on that $50 bill, would you be sitting here right now? Her face changed. She had expected the question. Nathan had probably warned her. Still hearing it from me was different. Ariana. No explanation yet. She closed her mouth. Just answer. Madison looked toward the window. The silence lasted so long I could hear the refrigerator humming. Finally, she whispered, I don't know. It was the same answer she had given in Richard's office. But I wanted more. Think about it. She looked at me again. If there had been no Hawthorne Avenue, no property record, no possibility that the gift was worth more than $200, would you have come here this quickly? Her eyes filled. No. The word was barely audible, but it was there. I felt something inside me settle. Not satisfaction. Clarity. Thank you. She seemed surprised. For what? For finally telling me the truth. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. I hate that that's the truth. I imagine you do. I would have apologized eventually. Maybe. I would. Maybe. She flinched. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I wasn't going to comfort her out of accountability either. Madison stared into her cup. When I saw what you wrote, I panicked. Because of the house. Yes. At least you're saying it. She nodded. I knew Hawthorne was becoming valuable. I knew developers were buying nearby. When I searched the property and saw your name. She stopped. What I realized how stupid I had been. I looked at her. Stupid because you mocked someone who owned valuable property. Madison closed her eyes. That sounded terrible. It sounded accurate. She took a breath. At first, yes. There it was. At first I thought, oh my God, I just insulted someone who was about to give us a house. I let her sit with that sentence. But then Nathan started talking about his father writing on money. Her voice softened. And I realized you had tried to include Thomas in the gift. She wiped another tear. I had laughed at something personal before I even bothered to understand it. That hurt more than the money. I know. No, I don't think you did. She looked at me. The house was generous, very generous. But if Hawthorne had been worth $50,000 instead of hundreds of thousands, the message would have meant the same thing to me. Madison nodded. I understand that now. Do you? I'm trying to. That answer I respected. Trying was more believable than suddenly becoming a different person. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Madison said, I think I know why I'm like this. I almost interrupted. I didn't want excuses. She saw it in my face. I'm not saying it makes what I did okay. Good. It doesn't. She took a slow breath. My mother grew up with very little. That surprised me. Patricia Reynolds carried herself like someone who had been born with monogrammed towels. Madison continued. She doesn't talk about it. Her father worked in a factory. They rented. She wore secondhand clothes. I listened. When she married my father and they started making money, everything changed. Where we lived, what schools I went to, who we knew. Madison stared at her hands. My mother taught me that people decide what you're worth before you open your mouth. That sounds exhausting. It was. She gave a humorless laugh. If someone's house was smaller than ours, she noticed. If their clothes were cheap, she noticed. If a friend's parents didn't have the right jobs, she noticed. And you learned to notice too. Yes. Her voice broke. I became very good at it. I thought about the handbag in the restaurant, the luxury condominium brochure, the navy dress, the bookkeeping thing. Suddenly those moments had a history. But history wasn't absolution. Understanding where a behavior came from doesn't make the behavior harmless, I said. I know. Your mother may have taught you to measure people that way. You're 34 years old. You decide whether you keep using the ruler. Madison nodded. I know. And Nathan can't spend the rest of his life proving he belongs in your world. Her eyes lifted. He told you. He didn't have to. She looked ashamed. I pushed him. Yes. I told myself I was motivating him. To do what want more. More what? She opened her mouth, then stopped. Finally, she said, everything. I leaned forward. That's the problem with more Madison. If you never define enough, more becomes a whole. She started crying then. Not dramatically, quietly. I think I made him feel like he wasn't enough. Yes. That answer hurt her. I could see it, but she had come for honesty. I wasn't going to replace it with comfort. After a moment, she said, Nathan told me you aren't giving us the house. Yes. Madison looked at me. And there it was, the real test. I watched her expression carefully. She nodded. I understand. No argument. No question about value. No request for reconsideration. Just those two words. I'm disappointed, she admitted. I appreciate you saying that. I would be lying if I said I wasn't. Yes, but I understand. I believe that too. Then she surprised me. I don't think you should give it to us. I studied her. Why? Because if you do, I'll always wonder whether I apologized because I wanted the house. That isn't something I can answer for you. I know. She wiped her face. I need to figure that out myself. For the first time, I saw something in Madison I hadn't seen before. Not humility exactly, the beginning of it. She stood. I should go. I walked her to the door. Before she stepped outside, she turned. Do you forgive me? I could have said yes immediately. It would have made the moment easier. But forgiveness deserved honesty too. I think I can. Her face fell slightly. I continued. But forgiveness isn't pretending nothing happened. She nodded. I know. It doesn't mean you get the house. I know. It doesn't mean I trust you tomorrow because you apologized today. I understand. And it doesn't mean you're unwelcome in my family. That surprised her. Her eyes filled again. You're my son's wife. I paused. And I hope someday we can become something more than women who tolerate each other because we both love him. Madison cried then. So did I. She hugged me carefully, almost asking permission with the movement. I hugged her back. Not because everything was repaired, because I wanted repair to remain possible. After she left, I returned to the kitchen. Her coffee was still half full. I sat down and looked at the empty chair across from me. Thomas would have understood. He believed in second chances. But he also believed that second chances should not erase first consequences. That afternoon I called Richard. Ready to decide, he asked. Yes. The house. Yes. What do you want to do? I looked through the window at the late afternoon sunlight stretching across my backyard. For weeks I had thought there were only two possibilities. Give Hawthorne to Nathan and Madison, or keep it. Now I understood there was a third. The house had once given Helen Parker security when she needed it most. Maybe that was the real legacy Thomas had created. Not wealth, shelter. I want to keep Hawthorne, I told Richard. For now, for now. But I want to talk about something else. What I want to know whether we can use some of its value to help women like Helen. Richard became quiet. What exactly are you thinking? I don't know yet. Then I smiled. But I think Thomas would. The house Madison had nearly received because she married my son was about to become something very different. And when Nathan learned what I intended to do with it, his reaction would tell me whether the change I had begun to see in him was real. Richard Coleman did not react to my idea the way I expected. I thought he might tell me it was too complicated. Instead, he removed his glasses, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. Thomas would love this. That was enough to make my throat tighten. We were sitting in the same office where only days earlier Nathan and Madison had tried to understand what the words on a $50 bill meant. Now the Hawthorne file was open between us again. But the question had changed. It was no longer, should I give this house to my son? It was, what can this house become? I don't want to do anything reckless, I said. Richard smiled. That's reassuring. Considering your previous plan was to give away a property worth $750,000 inside a wedding envelope. I wasn't putting the deed in the envelope. An important legal distinction. I gave him a look. He laughed. Then we became serious. Helen wasn't leaving for North Carolina for another few weeks, which meant I had time. Richard explained several possibilities. I could sell Hawthorne after Helen moved and invest the proceeds. I could refinance against the property. I could continue renting it and dedicate part of the income to a charitable purpose. Or depending on how the redevelopment progressed, I could wait and negotiate later from a stronger position. What would Thomas do? Richard asked. Refuse every offer until someone overpaid out of frustration. That sounds accurate. I smiled. Then I looked at the old photograph I had brought with me. Thomas standing in front of the Hawthorne house during renovation. Dust on his shirt, a hammer in one hand. That ridiculous grin. When Helen first asked about renting the house, we could have charged more. I remember, Thomas wouldn't. No. He said a house wasn't useful if the person who needed it couldn't afford to live there. Richard nodded. That sounds like him. I think that's what I want Hawthorne to keep doing. Richard folded his hands. Tell me more. So I did. I told him I wanted to create a small housing assistance fund for older women facing instability after losing a spouse. Not something enormous. Not a foundation with my name carved into a building. Something practical. Temporary rental assistance. Emergency property tax support. Help with legal fees when a widow didn't understand what she owned. Maybe grants for essential home repairs. The kinds of problems that could turn a manageable life into a crisis. I knew how frightening paperwork could feel after a husband died, and I had been a bookkeeper. I understood numbers. I understood contracts. I had Richard. Many women had none of those advantages. How much? Richard asked. I don't know yet. That's the accountant equivalent of blasphemy. I'm retired. You're never that retired. He was right. We spent the next 2 hours discussing numbers. By the time I left, we had no final structure, but we had a direction. Hawthorne would remain mine. The transfer documents prepared for Nathan and Madison would be withdrawn. A portion of the property's eventual value or income would fund the program. I would keep enough assets to protect my own future. Richard insisted on that part. You are not allowed to impoverish yourself in the process of being generous. I wasn't planning to. You were planning to give your son a $740,000 house. He's my son. That sentence is banned in this office. I laughed. For the first time since the wedding, Hawthorne didn't feel like a wound. It felt like possibility again. That evening, I invited Nathan to dinner. Madison came too. I had considered speaking only to Nathan, but that felt wrong. The decision affected expectations they had both formed. They deserved to hear it together. Madison arrived carrying a pie. I didn't make it, she said immediately. Thank God. She blinked, then laughed. It was the first easy laugh we'd shared since the wedding. Dinner itself was almost painfully ordinary. Chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. Nathan asked about a leaking gutter. Madison told me about a client who had rejected 11 houses because none had a kitchen large enough for 2 refrigerators. For nearly an hour, nobody mentioned Hawthorne. I appreciated that. After dinner, I brought coffee to the table. Nathan looked at me. You talked to Mr. Coleman? Yes. Madison became still. Yes, I repeated. I've made a decision about the house. Nathan nodded. Madison said nothing. The transfer documents are being withdrawn. Nathan's expression didn't change. Madison's did, only slightly. Disappointment. She had promised honesty, and her face gave it to me before her words did. Then she nodded. Okay, no argument, no plea, no mention of the value. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. I continued. Hawthorne will remain mine, good Nathan said. I raised an eyebrow. He smiled faintly. I mean it. I know. Madison looked at me. Are you going to sell eventually, perhaps? She hesitated. The real estate agent in her clearly wanted to ask more. She stopped herself. I noticed. So what are you going to do with it? Nathan asked. I told them about Helen, about the years Thomas and I had kept her rent low, about how frightening widowhood could become when financial security disappeared at the same time as a spouse. Then I explained the idea Richard and I were developing. Nathan listened quietly. Madison leaned forward. A housing fund. A small one. for widows, primarily older women dealing with housing instability after losing a spouse. Madison looked down. That makes sense. Nathan smiled. Dad would love that. I think so too. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Madison said something I hadn't expected. Can I help? My first instinct was suspicion. I hated that. What do you mean I know housing? She quickly added, not financially. I mean with information. Nathan watched her. Madison continued. I work with lenders, title companies, inspectors, attorneys. I see people make terrible decisions because they don't understand what they're signing. She looked at me. If you're helping older homeowners, I could put together a list of reputable people. No commissions, no referrals for me. Nothing like that. I studied her face. Why she didn't become defensive. Because I'm trying to become someone who would have offered before there was a house involved. That answer silenced me. Nathan looked at his wife differently. So did I. We'll see, I said. Madison nodded. That's fair. After they left, I stood on the porch watching their car disappear. Thomas had once told me people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe you have nothing they want. I had seen that truth at the wedding. But perhaps there was another version. People could also reveal whether they had changed when they knew there was nothing left to gain. Madison knew Hawthorne wasn't hers. She knew apologizing wouldn't restore the gift. And yet she was still trying. That didn't erase what happened. But it mattered. 3 days later, Helen asked me to come to Hawthorne. She was packing. Boxes covered the living room floor. The house looked smaller without 18 years of her belongings filling every corner. I heard you aren't selling right away, she said. Who told you, Richard? That man talks too much. He said you'd say that. I laughed. Helen touched the old fireplace mantel. I loved this house. It loved you back. She smiled. Then I told her what I planned. By the time I finished, Helen was crying. Oh, Ariana, don't make it sentimental. Richard already made it complicated enough. She laughed through her tears. Thomas would be proud. Everyone kept saying that. I hoped they were right. Before I left, Helen handed me a small brass key. The Hawthorne front door key. I suppose this belongs to you again. I held it in my palm. For 18 years, that key had meant rental property. For several months, it had meant Nathan's future. For a few terrible days, it had represented everything wrong with my family. Now it meant something else. Choice. I drove home with the key in my purse. That evening, Nathan called. Not to ask about Hawthorne, not to ask about money. He wanted to know whether I needed help cleaning the gutters before fall. I smiled. Saturday, 8:10. Dad always started at 8. Your father was unreasonable. Nathan laughed. 10 it is. Before hanging up, he said, Mom, yes, thank you. For what? For not giving us the house. That surprised me. That's an unusual thank you. I think if you had given it to us, I would have learned the wrong lesson. I sat quietly. What lesson? That I could let people hurt you, apologize afterward, and still receive everything you planned to give me. My eyes filled. Nathan continued. I don't want to be that man. You don't have to be. I know. After we hung up, I took the Hawthorne key from my purse and placed it beside Thomas's photograph. I had once believed giving Nathan a house would be one of the greatest acts of love I could offer him. I had been wrong. Sometimes love gives, sometimes love forgives, and sometimes love closes its hand around something valuable and says, no, not because I don't love you, because I do. 18 months later, Nathan would hand me another small piece of money with words written across it. Only $20. Far less than the wedding gift Madison had mocked. Yet I would treasure that bill more than the entire Hawthorne property. Because by then, my son finally understood something Thomas had spent his life trying to teach him. The value of money and the value of a gift were never the same thing. 18 months after Nathan and Madison's wedding, I found myself standing outside a townhouse with a $20 grocery store cake in my hands. I had offered to bring dessert. Madison had said she would make something. Nathan had immediately called me afterward. Mom, bring backup. So I did. That probably tells you more about where our family ended up than any dramatic speech could. We could joke again. Not about everything. Some wounds deserve more respect than that. But enough. Nathan and Madison had sold Nathan's starter house 6 months after the wedding. Not because they were moving into something larger, because they finally admitted they couldn't keep pretending their financial situation was better than it was. They used part of the equity to pay down the wedding debt. They sold Madison's luxury SUV and replaced it with a used crossover. The honeymoon they had once planned for Italy never happened. Instead, they spent 4 days in North Carolina the following spring after they had paid off the last credit card. Madison later told me those 4 days meant more to her than Italy probably would have. I believed her, not because she said it, because by then she had stopped needing me to believe everything immediately. That was one of the biggest changes. She understood that trust was built through repetition. Small choices. Consistent behavior. No dramatic announcement could restore what had been damaged. Neither could one apology. So she stopped trying to force the ending. She simply started behaving differently. Madison also left the luxury real estate firm. That surprised everyone, including me. For years, she had built her identity around expensive listings, wealthy clients, and the prestige of being seen in the right circles. But after the wedding, that world became uncomfortable. She told me once that she began noticing conversations she had previously enjoyed. Agents laughing about inexpensive neighborhoods. Clients dismissing perfectly good homes because the address wasn't impressive enough. People treating service workers as though they were invisible. I used to participate, she admitted. At least you're noticing now. She nodded. I wish I had noticed sooner. Most of us do. Eventually, she joined a smaller brokerage that worked heavily with first-time homebuyers. The commissions were often smaller. The clients were less glamorous. Madison loved it. One Saturday, she called me after a closing. You would have loved this couple. Why they saved for 9 years. She sounded emotional. They bought this little 2-bedroom place. The kitchen is tiny. The bathroom needs work. But when I handed them the keys, the wife cried. I smiled. That's what a real house looks like. Madison went silent. She remembered. So did I. Months before the wedding, she had looked around Nathan's perfectly good home and said they needed a real house. I deserved that, she said. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. Then she laughed. But I deserved it. That became our relationship. Not mother and daughter. Not yet. Perhaps never in the sentimental way people like to imagine. But something honest. She started calling without needing anything. Sometimes she asked about recipes. Sometimes she complained about Nathan leaving cabinet doors open. Sometimes she told me about a client. And sometimes she simply said, "How are you?" At first I waited for the second question. There wasn't one. No mention of my finances. No question about Hawthorne. No suggestion that I sell my house. Just conversation. Nathan changed too. His transformation was quieter. He stopped trying to prevent every disagreement with Madison. That caused more arguments at first, not fewer. But they were healthier arguments. Real ones. When they couldn't afford something, Nathan said so. When Madison wanted something because she feared what others might think, he asked why. And when Nathan became passive simply to avoid conflict, Madison began calling him on it herself. They were learning how to be married instead of learning how to perform marriage. I respected that. Hawthorne changed too. After Helen moved to North Carolina, I kept the property. Richard helped me create a small program we eventually called the Brooks Housing Assistance Fund. I refused to put my first name on it. Thomas would have hated that kind of attention. Our first year was modest. We helped 6 women. One needed emergency roof repairs after insurance denied part of her claim. Another was behind on property taxes after her husband died and his pension income disappeared. A third needed an attorney to untangle a title problem she hadn't known existed. 6 women, not hundreds. But 6 women slept more securely because an old house Thomas bought 18 years earlier had become valuable. That was enough for me. Madison kept her promise too. She gave Richard a list of reputable inspectors, title companies, housing counselors, and lenders. She asked for nothing. No commission. No recognition. No photographs for social media. Richard noticed. So he said one afternoon, "Are you beginning to like your daughter-in-law again?" I never completely stopped. That's annoyingly mature. I have my moments. The evening I arrived at Nathan and Madison's townhouse with the backup cake was October 14th, my wedding anniversary. Thomas and I would have been married 44 years. Nathan remembered. He always did. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, potatoes, a salad Madison actually made herself. I examined it suspiciously. You chopped these vegetables? Yes. Without professional supervision? Ariana. Nathan laughed. We ate at a small dining table that barely fit 6 people. Nothing matched perfectly. Their chairs had come from 2 different sets. There was a scratch on the table. A stack of unopened mail sat on the counter. It was imperfect. It was wonderful. After dinner, Madison brought out her dessert. It was supposed to be chocolate cake. It had collapsed in the middle. Nathan looked at me. I slowly reached for the grocery store box. Madison pointed at both of us. I hate this family. But she was laughing. We ate both cakes. Later, Madison cleared the plates. Nathan stayed at the table. Mom. Something in his voice made me look up. He reached into his pocket and placed a small cream-colored envelope in front of me. For 1 second, my heart stopped. It looked almost exactly like the envelope I had given them at the wedding. Nathan, open it. Madison stood near the kitchen doorway watching us. I slid my finger beneath the flap. Inside was one $20 bill. I stared at it. Then I looked at Nathan. $20. He smiled. Try not to insult me in front of everyone. Madison covered her face. Oh, I deserved that. I laughed so hard I had to put the bill down. Then Nathan said, look closer. My laughter stopped. I knew. Before I even picked it up again, I knew. Thomas. I turned the bill toward the light. Along the white edge in Nathan's handwriting were 7 words. For everything money could never repay. My vision blurred. I read it again. Then again. Nathan's voice became quiet. Dad used to write on money. I remember. I thought maybe we shouldn't let that disappear. I pressed my lips together, trying not to cry. It didn't work. Nathan moved his chair closer. Mom. I shook my head. Give me a minute. Madison was crying too. That made me laugh through my tears. You don't get to cry. You made fun of the last one. I know. She wiped her face. That's why I'm crying. Nathan took my hand. I kept thinking about what Dad wrote on that $100 bill when I got my first apartment. For the first thing that breaks, something always breaks. We said the last part together. I laughed. He was right. Nathan looked at me. About more than plumbing. The room became quiet. He squeezed my hand. I can't repay you for everything you and Dad gave me. You don't owe me repayment. I know. That took you long enough, he smiled. I know that too. I looked down at the $20 bill. $20, 1/10 of the wedding gift Madison had mocked, and infinitely more valuable to me. I'm never spending this. Nathan laughed. That's what I figured. I took it home that night. I placed it inside the wooden box with the bills Thomas had written on years earlier. $5, $50, $100, and now 20. Beside the box sat the brass key to Hawthorne Avenue. Once I had believed that key represented the greatest gift I could give my son. A mortgage-free house, hundreds of thousands of dollars, security. But standing there in my quiet study, I finally understood that keeping Hawthorne had given Nathan something the house itself never could. Consequences. The opportunity to discover that love did not guarantee entitlement. The chance to repair what he had damaged instead of having money cover the cracks. I never became grateful for what happened at the wedding. Humiliation doesn't become good simply because something meaningful grows afterward. But I became grateful that I hadn't responded with cruelty. I didn't expose Madison's financial problems to the guests. I didn't announce what Hawthorne was worth. I didn't use money to make her feel as small as she had tried to make me feel. I simply stopped the gift and let the truth do the rest. Thomas had been right all along. Money should give you choices. It should never become the reason you make them. Nathan had forgotten that. Madison had never learned it. And somehow 4 $50 bills helped teach them both. The most expensive gift I ever planned for my son was a house. The most important gift was letting him lose it.